The autumn wind carried whispers of danger through Pinecrest Valley as Emma Wilson stood on the porch of Willow Creek Farm, watching darkness claim the distant mountains. She couldn't know that by morning, her world would burn to ashes, that the outlaws creeping toward her family's homestead would forever alter her fate. She couldn't imagine that the man who would save her from hell wore eagle feathers in his hair and led a people her kind called savages. She couldn't dream that in losing everything, she would find a love that defied the very boundaries of the frontier itself. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Emma Wilson stood at the kitchen window of Willow Creek Farm, watching as her father and brother worked the field at the day's end. At 23, she had grown accustomed to the rhythm of frontier life, though it remained a far cry from the classroom in Boston where she had once taught. 3 years had passed since illness claimed her mother, prompting her father William to pack up their lives and drag what remained of their family westward. A fresh start, he had promised, his voice hoarse with grief but eyes bright with determination. The land will heal us. The land had provided, if nothing else. Their modest homestead sat nestled in the shadow of the Sierra Madre Mountains, the Silver Snake River curving around their property like a gleaming guardian. William had built the cabin with his own hands, solid pine logs chinked with mud and stone, a sturdy haven against the wilderness. Samuel, now 12, had grown tall and strong in the mountain air, his boyhood rapidly giving way to the responsibilities of frontier manhood. Emma tucked a strand of chestnut hair behind her ear and returned to the venison stew simmering in the cast-iron pot. Her fingers absently reached for the locket hanging around her neck, her mother's portrait pressed inside, a tether to the life they had left behind. Boston felt like a distant dream now. The polished schoolroom floors and eager young faces of her students replaced by dirt and timber and the endless work of survival. "Something smells mighty fine in here," William announced as he entered, removing his hat and hanging it on the peg by the door. Crow's feet deepened around his eyes when he smiled, though at 45, hard work had left his body as strong as men many years his junior. "Samuel's just finishing up with the horses. That boy's got a way with animals like I've never seen." Emma smiled, ladling stew into wooden bowls. "He gets that from Mother," she said softly. It was easier now to speak of her, the sharp edges of loss having dulled to a persistent ache rather than the searing pain of fresh grief. William nodded, settling into his chair at the head of the rough-hewn table. "That he does." They ate by lamplight, the golden glow warming the simple cabin. Samuel recounted spotting wolf tracks near the western edge of their property, while William discussed riding to Copper Springs the following week for supplies before the first snow. Emma listened, content in the familiar conversation, in the security of their modest existence. The isolation of frontier life had been the hardest adjustment. The nearest neighbor 4 miles away, the small settlement of Copper Springs, a half-day's ride. She missed the bustle of city life, the exchange of ideas, the books and newspapers that arrived weeks late, if at all. "Emma's wool gathering again," Samuel teased, nudging her foot beneath the table. She blinked, returning to the moment. "Just thinking about what we might need from town. My journal is nearly full, and I wouldn't mind some new fabric if it can be spared." William nodded thoughtfully. "We've had a good harvest. I reckon we can afford a few comforts." His expression softened. "You've been patient with this life, Emma. I know it's not what you planned." "It's home now," she replied simply, because it was true enough. If she sometimes longed for more, for the stimulation of teaching or the company of other young women, she kept such thoughts to herself. William had enough burdens without her adding to them. After dinner, while Samuel whittled, By the fire, and William cleaned his rifle, Emma wrote in her journal by lamplight. She documented the day's events, the changing colors of the aspen trees, her thoughts on the book she'd been reading, a dog-eared copy of Wuthering Heights that she'd read 3 times since arriving in Pinecrest Valley. "Storm's coming," William commented, glancing toward the window where darkness had fallen completely. "Hear that wind picking up?" Emma paused in her writing, listening to the mournful howl as gusts swept down from the mountains. The cabin creaked in response, solid but vulnerable against nature's power. "Will the harvest be safe?" "Most of it's in. What's not can wait." "Another day," William reassured her, running an oiled cloth down the barrel of his Winchester. "Might be our first snow coming early." Later, as Emma prepared for bed in the small room she claimed as her own, separated from the main living area by a patchwork quilt hung from the ceiling, she thought she heard something beneath the wind's persistent moan. A horse's whinny, too distant to be their own in the nearby stable. She paused, nightdress halfway over her head, listening intently. Nothing followed but the wind and the familiar sounds of her father banking the fire for the night. "You're imagining things," she murmured to herself, completing her bedtime routine. Still, a strange unease settled over her as she slipped beneath the heavy quilts. She left the small oil lamp burning low beside her bed, its flame dancing with each draft that found its way through the cabin's seams. Sleep came fitfully, broken by dreams of pursuit through endless forests, of voices calling her name from the darkness. When a hand clamped over her mouth shortly before dawn, Emma thought for one disoriented moment that she was still dreaming. The rank smell of unwashed bodies and tobacco convinced her otherwise. "Not a sound, pretty thing," a voice whispered, hot breath against her ear sending revulsion down her spine. "Unless you want your pa and brother full of holes." Emma's eyes flew open, adjusting to the dim light. A bearded face loomed over her, yellowed teeth bared in what might have been meant as a smile but looked more like a wolf's snarl. Behind him, shadows moved, 4, maybe 5 men filling her tiny sleeping space. Terror seized her, but concern for her family overrode it. She nodded slightly, indicating compliance, and the hand lifted from her mouth. "Get dressed," the man ordered, tossing her a dress from the peg where it hung. "You've got 1 minute before we lose our patience." Shaking, Emma clutched the garment to her chest. "Please," she whispered. "Who are you? What do you want?" The man struck a match, lighting a cigarette with deliberate slowness. In the brief flare, Emma saw his face clearly, hard angles and cold eyes beneath a battered hat. A long scar ran from his left eye to the corner of his mouth, pulling his features into a permanent sneer. "Name's Jacob Reed," he said, exhaling. "Smoke. And what I want, Miss Wilson, is to settle a debt your father's been carrying too long." Emma's confusion must have shown on her face, for Jacob chuckled darkly. "He didn't tell you? Your honorable father and I have history. Gettysburg, summer of '63. His voice hardened. "He was a captain. I was a deserter, according to him. He had me flogged within an inch of my life before a Union shell gave me my chance to escape." Cold understanding dawned. The war had left scars on more than just bodies. It had created grudges that festered like infected wounds, breeding men like Jacob Reed who carried violence across the frontier. "My father only did his duty," Emma said, finding courage despite her fear. Jacob's hand snapped forward, gripping her jaw painfully. His duty cost me everything. Now I'm here to return the favor." He released her roughly. "Get dressed. Time's wasting." Emma dressed with trembling fingers, trying to ignore the men's gazes on her. As she pulled on her boots, a gunshot shattered the pre-dawn silence, followed by a cry she recognized immediately. Samuel, She bolted for the quilt partition, but strong arms caught her around the waist, lifting her off her feet as she kicked and struggled. "Let me go! Samuel! Father!" she screamed, all thoughts of compliance forgotten. "Shut her up," Jacob ordered, and a filthy bandana was forced between her teeth, tied painfully tight behind her head. They dragged her into the main room, where the scene that greeted her would haunt her nightmares for years to come. William Wilson knelt on the floor, blood streaming from a gash on his temple, hands bound before him. His eyes, when they met Emma's, carried a mixture of fury and devastating fear. Samuel lay nearby, clutching his shoulder where crimson stained his nightshirt. "Didn't need to shoot the boy," one of the men muttered, a tall figure standing near. "The door. He's just a kid, Reed." "He came at Silas with a knife," Jacob replied coldly. "He's lucky to be breathing." William lunged forward despite his bonds. "You bastard! This is between us. Leave my children out of it." Jacob delivered a vicious kick to William's stomach, doubling him over. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Should have thought about consequences before you strung me up for the vultures, Captain." He gestured to the man holding Emma. "Get her outside. We're taking what's precious and leaving the rest." Emma renewed her struggles as they dragged her toward the door, her muffled screams barely audible. She caught a final glimpse of her father's desperate face, of Samuel's pain-glazed eyes following her movement. The pre-dawn air hit her like a physical blow as they emerged into the yard. 6 horses waited, stomping impatiently in the dirt. Emma was thrown roughly across a saddle, her wrists bound to the pommel. "What about Wilson?" one of the men asked, emerging from the cabin. Jacob pulled a flask from his coat, taking a long swallow before answering. "Silas is handling it." As if summoned by his name, a gaunt man with a wild tangle of black hair stepped onto the porch. Even in the dim light, Emma could see the gleam of blood on the knife in his hand. Behind him, flames began to lick at the cabin walls. "No!" Emma screamed against her gag, the sound emerging as a strangled moan. She thrashed against her bonds, heedless of the rope cutting into her wrists. Jacob mounted his horse, bringing it alongside hers. He leaned close, his voice almost gentle. "Your pa made me watch everything I loved burn, Miss Wilson. Only fitting he should do the same." The outlaws pulled away from the homestead as the fire took hold, hungry flames devouring the dried timber of the cabin Emma had called home. Her tears fell unchecked as she looked back, straining to see any sign of her father or brother emerging from the inferno. Nothing moved but smoke and flame against the lightening sky. They rode hard through the day, following game trails and dry creek beds rather than established paths. Emma's body ached from the jarring gait of the horse beneath her, her wrists rubbed raw by the ropes. Thirst clawed at her throat, but her captors offered no water, no rest, no mercy. By midday, they entered a landscape unfamiliar to Emma. Jagged formations of red rock rising from scrubland, twisted juniper trees clinging to impossible perches. The mountains loomed closer now, their slopes dense with pine forest. The air grew thinner, cooler as they climbed, though Emma barely noticed through the fog of grief and fear enveloping her. "We're being followed," the tall outlaw announced, during a brief stop to water the horses. "Seen the same dust on the horizon since mid-morning." Jacob squinted in the direction the man pointed. "Likely just travelers. Or the law from Copper Springs." "Nobody in that 2-bit town would dare come after us," Jacob scoffed, but he mounted up quickly nonetheless. "We'll push through to Devil's Backbone before nightfall. No posse will follow us there." Emma was hauled upright in the saddle, her gag finally removed, though her hands remained bound. She gasped in air, her throat painfully dry. "Please," she croaked. "Water." Jacob considered her a moment, then passed her his canteen. "Drink. I need you alive when we send the ransom note." "Ransom?" Emma managed after several desperate swallows. "My father is—" She couldn't bring herself to finish the sentence. "Your father has friends in Copper Springs. That banker, Hollister, seemed mighty fond of your family." A glimmer of hope pierced Emma's despair. If they intended to ransom her, perhaps her father and Samuel had survived somehow. Perhaps the outlaws only assumed they had perished in the fire. "How much?" she asked, her voice stronger now. Jacob's scarred face twisted into something between a smile and a grimace. $5,000 ought to pay for what he did to me, plus interest. An impossible sum. Even if her father lived, even if the banker agreed to help, such money couldn't be gathered quickly in a frontier town like Copper Springs. "It will take time," Emma said carefully. "Then I suggest your pa doesn't waste any." Jacob snapped, the reins urging his horse forward. 2 weeks. After that, they get you back in pieces." The brutal words stole Emma's breath, but beneath her terror, a steel core of resolve began to form. She would survive this. She would find a way home, or, if home no longer existed, she would ensure Jacob Reed paid for what he had done. As they resumed their punishing pace, Emma took stock of her captors. Jacob Reed rode at the front, his back rigid with purpose. The tall man who had questioned shooting Samuel seemed less hardened than the others, occasionally glancing back at Emma with something like regret in his weathered face. Silas, the wild-haired man with the knife, had eyes that never settled, darting constantly between the trail and the horizon as if expecting phantoms to materialize. 2 others rounded out the gang, a heavy-set man with a red beard and a younger outlaw barely old enough to shave. Knowledge was power, her father had always taught her. Emma memorized their faces, their mannerisms, searching for weaknesses she might exploit when opportunity arose. The opportunity came sooner than she could have imagined. As twilight descended and the first stars appeared over the mountains, they entered a narrow canyon. Sheer walls of striated rock rose on either side, creating a natural corridor, barely wide enough for 2 horses to ride abreast. Devil's Backbone Gorge earned its name from the jagged spine of stone that ran along its upper edge, like the dorsal ridges of some massive petrified serpent. "Almost home, boys," Jacob called back, his voice echoing unnaturally in the confined space. The first arrow struck with deadly accuracy, taking the red-bearded outlaw through the throat. He made no sound beyond a wet gurgle as he toppled from his saddle. The second arrow followed instantly, burying itself in Silas's shoulder, drawing a howl of pain and rage. "Ambush!" the tall outlaw shouted, drawing his revolver. "It's Apaches!" Chaos erupted in the narrow confines of the gorge. Gunshots reverberated like thunder, horses reared and screamed, dust billowed in choking clouds. Emma's mount bolted forward, driven by panic, carrying her deeper into the canyon. Behind her, men shouted curses and orders, their voices distorted by the rock walls surrounding them. A shadow detached itself from the cliff face ahead, landing with preternatural grace directly in her horse's path. The animal skidded to a halt, nearly unseating Emma despite her bonds. She looked up, heart hammering, into the face of a man unlike any she had ever seen. He stood well over 6 feet tall, his copper skin gleaming in the fading light, his obsidian eyes fixed on her with the intensity of a hunting hawk. Long black hair hung in 2 braids adorned with eagle feathers and bone beads. His chest was bare, save for painted symbols and a silver pendant, his lower body clad in buckskin leggings. In one hand he held a bow as tall as Emma herself. In the other, a knife with a jagged stone blade. For an eternal moment they regarded each other, predator and prey, rescuer and victim, 2 souls from worlds that rarely met without bloodshed. Then he moved, swift as thought, slicing through the ropes, binding Emma to the saddle. Before she could react, he pulled her from the horse with surprising gentleness, setting her on her feet beside him. "Stay," he commanded, his English heavily accented, but clear. Emma stood frozen as he knocked an arrow, drew back with fluid strength, and loosed it toward the ongoing battle. A cry told her it had found its mark. Behind her, hoofbeats approached rapidly, more Apache warriors materializing from the shadows like spirits, their faces streaked with paint, their weapons held ready. The tall outlaw broke through the chaos, his horse lathered with exertion. Blood streamed from a gash across his forehead, but his eyes widened with recognition when he saw Emma standing beside the Apache warrior. "Reed!" he shouted over his shoulder. "They've got the girl!" Jacob appeared moments later, his pistol drawn, hatred twisting his features as he took in the scene before him. "Hand her over!" he snarled at the warrior. "She's mine!" The Apache chief, for Emma realized that was who stood beside her, replied with another arrow that grazed Jacob's arm, causing him to drop his weapon with a curse. "She is not yours," the warrior stated, his voice deep and steady as bedrock. "No person belongs to another." Jacob's face contorted with fury. "I'll kill you for this, savage. I'll kill every last one of your filthy tribe." The chief merely knocked another arrow, his expression unchanging. "Leave, or die here." Something in his tone, absolute certainty perhaps, must have penetrated even Jacob's rage. He glanced at the handful of warriors now visible on the canyon ledges above, at the fallen bodies of his companions, at the blood seeping through his sleeve. "This isn't over," he promised, backing his horse slowly. "I'll find you, Emma Wilson, and when I do, you'll wish I'd left you to burn with your family." Emma flinched at the words, but the chief remained motionless beside her until Jacob and the tall outlaw had disappeared back down the canyon, their retreating hoofbeats eventually swallowed by the gathering night. Only then did he turn to her, slicing through the bindings at her wrists with a single clean stroke of his knife. Emma gasped as blood rushed painfully back into her numb fingers. "You are hurt," he observed, his gaze moving clinically over her. Bruised face, her raw wrists, the tears in her dress. "My family," Emma managed, her voice breaking. "They burned our home. My father, my brother." "The men who took you are cowards who prey on the weak," the chief interrupted. "But they are not fools. They will return with more guns." As if to emphasize his point, a distant cry echoed through the canyon, Jacob rallying what remained of his gang perhaps, or calling for reinforcements. The chief whistled softly, and a paint horse with no saddle approached from the shadows. In one fluid motion, he lifted Emma and placed her on its back, then swung up behind her. "Wait," Emma protested weakly. "I don't even know who you are." "Ubid." The warrior guided the horse toward a nearly invisible path leading up the canyon wall. "I am Maka," he said simply, "and you are safer with me than with the ghosts of your past." As they disappeared into the darkness, the first snowflakes of an early winter began to fall, covering their tracks and erasing all evidence that Emma Wilson had ever passed through Devil's Backbone Gorge. Dawn broke over Shadow Canyon, bathing the Apache settlement in golden light that did little to warm the chill in Emma's bones. She sat wrapped in a buffalo hide outside a dwelling of hides and branches, watching as the camp stirred to life around her. Women moved between cook fires, children carried water from the nearby stream, warriors tended to horses in the pine-sheltered corral. None approached her directly, though many cast curious glances in her direction. She had passed the night in a fog of exhaustion and grief, barely registering the journey to this hidden valley nestled high in the mountains. Maka had delivered her to an elderly woman named Nakia, whose lined face betrayed no emotion as she cleaned Emma's wounds with a stinging herbal mixture and offered a drink that tasted of pine and bitter roots. Emma had fallen into dreamless sleep shortly after, waking only as the first light penetrated the dwelling. Now, alone with her thoughts for the first time since the attack, the full weight of her situation crushed down upon her. Her father and brother were likely dead, her home destroyed, and she herself stranded among people whose language she didn't speak, whose customs were foreign, whose intentions toward her remained unclear. Even if they meant her no harm, and the gentle treatment from Nakia suggested they didn't. What future awaited her here? How long before Jacob Reed tracked her to this place and brought destruction upon these people as well? Tears welled in Emma's eyes, but she fought them back. Crying would solve nothing. She needed to think clearly, to plan, to find a way back to civilization where she might learn if any of her family had survived the fire. You have strength in your eyes, despite your tears. Emma startled at Maka's voice. He stood several paces away, studying her with the same intense gaze as the previous night. In daylight, she could see details missed in the chaos of their first meeting. The fine lines at the corners of his eyes, suggesting he was older than she'd first thought, perhaps in his early 30s. The old scar that ran along his collarbone. The quiet dignity in his bearing that commanded respect without demanding it. "I need to go back," Emma said, rising to her feet despite the protests of her aching body. "My brother might have survived. He was injured, but alive when they took me." Maka's expression remained impassive. "The men who took you will be watching the burned place. They will expect you to return. Then I'll go to Copper Springs. The sheriff there will help me. The one who does nothing when settlers take Apache land, when hunters kill our women gathering plants." Maka's tone remained even, but something flashed in his dark eyes. "That sheriff will not help you against men like those who took you." Emma clenched her fists in frustration. "You don't understand. I can't stay here. I don't belong here." "No," Maka agreed. "You do not. But for now, you live because you are here." He gestured toward the activity of the camp. "My people have taken you in when they have every reason to fear white faces. Show respect for that gift." The rebuke, gentle as it was, struck Emma silent. He was right, of course. These people had saved her life, risking their own in the process. Her urgency to leave might seem like ingratitude, even if born of concern for her family. "I'm sorry," she said finally. "Thank you for saving me, for bringing me here. Her voice faltered. Maka studied her a moment longer, then nodded slightly. "Nakia says you should eat, then rest. Your body needs healing." As if summoned by her name, the elderly woman appeared, carrying a wooden bowl filled with some kind of stew. She pressed it into Emma's hands with a stream of words Emma couldn't understand, though the tone was unmistakably maternal in its scolding warmth. "She says you are too thin, like all white women," Maka translated, a hint of amusement briefly lightening his stern features. "She says you will eat everything in the bowl, or she will be offended." Despite everything, a ghost of a smile touched Emma's lips. Some aspects of motherhood, it seemed, transcended culture and language. She accepted the bowl with a nod of thanks, settling back onto the buffalo robe to eat. The stew was unlike anything she had tasted before, rich with unfamiliar spices, the meat gamey and tender. After the first tentative spoonful, hunger overcame caution, and Emma found herself devouring the meal with unexpected eagerness. "What will happen to me?" she asked when she had finished, setting the empty bowl aside. "Will I be a prisoner?" "Yeah." Maka frowned slightly. "You are not a prisoner. When the snow melts and the pass is clear, we will decide what is best." Emma glanced toward the mountains, where snow already blanketed the higher elevations. "And until then, you learn our ways. You help with work. You become part of Shadow Canyon." He held her gaze steadily. "Or you try to leave and die in the mountains. The choice is yours." The words were delivered without malice, a simple statement of fact. Winter in the high country was no small threat. Emma had heard enough tales of travelers caught in mountain blizzards, of entire wagon trains lost to early snowfall, to know the danger was real. "My name is Emma," she said finally, realizing she had never properly introduced herself. "Emma Wilson." Maka nodded once. Rest today, Emma Wilson. Tomorrow, you begin your new life. That new life began before dawn the next morning when Nakia shook Emma awake and pressed a bundle of clothing into her hands. The Apache garments, a long buckskin dress, leggings and moccasins, felt strange against Emma's skin, but she had to admit they offered more warmth and freedom of movement than her tattered dress had. The days that followed established a routine of sorts. Emma rose with the sun, joining the women at their tasks, gathering firewood, processing hides, preparing food, caring for children. Her initial attempts were clumsy, earning amused looks from the younger women and patient corrections from Nakia. The language barrier frustrated her enormously, though she began picking up words and phrases through repetition and gestures. Nights were the hardest. Alone in the small dwelling Nakia had assigned her, Emma would clutch her mother's locket and weep silently for all she had lost. She would trace the outline of her father's stern face in her memory, recall the sound of Samuel's laughter, and wonder if she would ever know their fate for certain. In her darkest moments, she contemplated trying to escape despite Maka's warning, walking until she found a road, a settlement, any sign of the world she had known. 2 weeks after her arrival, she did exactly that. The opportunity presented itself when most of the camp was occupied with a ceremony Emma didn't understand. With careful casualness, she slipped away, a small bundle of food secreted beneath her dress, a roughly drawn map in her mind of the route they had taken to reach Shadow Canyon. She made it nearly 5 miles, following a game trail down toward the lower elevations before the first snowflakes began to fall. By the time she realized the seriousness of her situation, the gentle flurries had transformed into a swirling white wall that obscured landmarks and coated the ground in treacherous ice. The temperature plummeted as afternoon gave way to evening, the wind cutting through her borrowed garments with merciless fingers. Emma sought shelter beneath an overhanging rock, huddling into herself as darkness fell and the storm intensified. She was a fool, she realized too late. Maka had been right. The mountains were no place for someone without experience, without proper supplies, without knowledge of the land. As the cold seeped into her bones and her extremities grew numb, she thought with bitter irony that she had survived outlaws and fire only to die from her own stubborn pride. She didn't remember closing her eyes, but she must have, for the next thing she knew, strong arms were lifting her from the snow. Through frost-crusted lashes, she glimpsed Maka's face, taut with an emotion she couldn't name. Other figures moved nearby, a search party, she realized dimly. "Foolish woman," Maka muttered, though there was more relief than anger in his tone. "You would rather die than live among us?" "I'm sorry," Emma managed through chattering teeth. "I just wanted home," he finished for her, settling her before him on his horse. "I know this hunger, but home is not always a place we can return to." The journey back to Shadow Canyon passed in a blur of pain as feeling returned to Emma's frozen limbs. By the time they reached the settlement, she was burning with fever, her body's protest against the abuse she had subjected it to. Nakia and 2 other women took charge, stripping her of wet clothing, applying poultices to her chest and feet, forcing bitter teas down her throat. For 3 days, Emma drifted between consciousness and delirium, her dreams filled with flames and the sounds of her brother's cries. When the fever finally broke, leaving her weak but clear-headed, she opened her eyes to find Maka sitting cross-legged beside her sleeping mat, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "You stayed with me," she murmured, her voice a raw whisper. "You fought hard to live," he replied simply. "It would be disrespectful not to witness such a battle." Emma struggled to sit up, accepting the water skin he offered. "I'm sorry for the trouble I caused, for putting your people at risk coming after me." Maka was silent for a long moment. "When I was a boy," he said finally, My father's band was attacked by soldiers. My mother, my sisters, many others were killed. Those of us who survived were forced to march for many days to a reservation far from our hunting grounds. His gaze grew distant. I escaped after 2 winters, walked for many moons to find what remained of my people. I understand the pull of what was lost. The unexpected sharing of his past struck Emma deeply. She had not considered that this man, who seemed so much a part of these mountains, might himself be no stranger to displacement and grief. "How did you survive it?" she asked softly. "The loss, the change." Marka met her gaze directly. "By understanding that what is broken cannot be unbroken. We do not forget, but we must build new paths or perish." He rose smoothly to his feet. "Rest now. When you are stronger, Nakia will continue your teaching." As he ducked through the dwelling entrance, Emma called after him, "Marka!" He paused, looking back. "Thank you for finding me, for bringing me back." Something softened briefly in his expression. "Snow cannot last forever, Emma Wilson. Neither does grief, if we allow ourselves to walk beyond its shadow." The words stayed with her in the days that followed, a quiet counterpoint to the ache of loss that still resided in her chest. As her strength returned, Emma threw herself into learning the ways of the Apache with renewed determination. If she could not return to her old life, at least not until spring, then she would make herself useful in this one. Nakia proved to be a patient, if demanding teacher. Under her guidance, Emma learned to identify edible plants even beneath snow cover, to prepare hides using brains and smoke, to weave baskets from yucca fibers so tightly they could hold water. The elderly woman's hands, gnarled with age but deft as a young girl's, demonstrated each technique with practiced grace. Language came more slowly, but Emma's background as a teacher served her well. She created systems for herself, associating Apache words with English equivalents, practicing phrases until they flowed naturally. The children of the camp became inadvertent tutors, giggling at her mispronunciations but eager to correct her, delighted when she mastered a difficult word. Marka remained a distant presence during this time, often away from the settlement for days at a time, with hunting parties or scouting missions. When their paths did cross, he would acknowledge her with a nod, sometimes pausing to inquire about her progress or to translate a complex instruction from Nakia. Emma found herself watching for his return, inexplicably reassured by his strong, silent presence when he was in camp. As weeks passed and winter tightened its grip on the mountains, Emma's place in Shadow Canyon shifted subtly. The initial wariness with which most of the Apache had regarded her gradually gave way to acceptance, if not quite friendship. She was invited to join the women's circles in the evenings, where stories were shared and work completed by firelight. Children no longer fell silent when she approached. One woman, barely older than Emma herself, even gifted her with a beaded bracelet. After Emma helped deliver her first child during a particularly fierce blizzard. Yet for all this integration, Emma remained aware of her otherness. She was neither captive nor truly free, neither enemy nor family. The duality of her existence weighed on her, as did the continuing uncertainty about her father and brothers' fate. Had there been a search when they failed to appear in Copper Springs? Had Jacob Reed collected his ransom? Or had he assumed her dead in the Apache attack? Would anyone even recognize her now, with her skin tanned by mountain winds and her hands calloused from Apache work? One clear, bitter evening in the depths of winter, Emma sat alone at the edge of the frozen stream that ran through Shadow Canyon. The setting sun painted the snow-covered landscape in shades of rose and gold, a beauty so stark it almost hurt to witness. She had removed her mother's locket from around her neck, the small oval of silver catching the fading light as she turned it in her fingers. "Your family." Maka's voice came from behind her, startling Emma from her reverie. She hadn't heard him approach, a common occurrence that still unnerved her, his ability to move through his environment like a shadow among shadows. "My mother," she confirmed, opening the locket to reveal the miniature portrait within. "She died 3 years ago. It's why we came west." Maka settled beside her on the fallen log, closer than he had ever sat before. For a moment, he simply gazed at the portrait in silence, his expression contemplative. "She has your eyes," he observed finally. "Strong eyes." Emma smiled faintly, tracing the outline of her mother's face with a fingertip. She was strong. Even when the consumption took her body, her spirit never weakened. She closed the locket carefully, the tiny clasp stiff with cold. "She would be shocked to see me now. Because you live among the Apache. Because I've survived it all." Emma tucked the locket into the small pouch she wore at her waist. "She worried I was too soft for this world, too attached to books and ideas rather than practical skills." Maka's gaze swept over the frozen landscape, taking in the jagged mountains painted with sunset fire. Books do not teach how to read. The sky, how to find water beneath snow, how to make peace with silence. He glanced at her. "But you have learned these things." The observation, simple as it was, warmed something in Emma that had remained cold since the night of her capture. It was true. She had changed, adapted, grown stronger in ways her former self could never have imagined. The Emma Wilson who taught. School in Boston would indeed be shocked to see the woman who could track game through snow, who could weave baskets that held water, who could speak enough Apache to make children laugh at her stories. "Your people have been kind to teach me," she said softly. "Not all," Maka replied, candid as always. "Some believe it is dangerous to show white eyes our ways. They fear you will bring others when spring comes." Emma turned to face him directly. "Is that what you believe?" The question hung between them, weighted with implications neither had voiced during her months in Shadow Canyon. Trust was a fragile thing on the frontier, doubly so between their peoples. "I believe you have a good heart," Maka said finally. "But good hearts can be divided by loyalties." Before Emma could respond, a commotion rose from the center of the settlement, shouts and the pounding of hooves. Maka was on his feet instantly, his posture alert, one hand dropping to the knife at his waist. "Stay here," he commanded, already moving toward the disturbance. Emma hesitated only briefly before following at a distance. Whatever was happening, it concerned her too, if it threatened the community that had become her reluctant sanctuary. A small group of warriors had ridden into camp, their horses lathered despite the cold, their expressions grim. Their leader, a man Emma recognized as Tokala, Maka's most trusted friend, dismounted in a fluid motion and strode to meet Maka. The two men spoke rapidly in Apache, their voices too low for Emma to catch more than a few familiar words. White men, soldiers, rifles. The settlement mobilized with practiced efficiency. Women gathering children, men collecting weapons, supplies being distributed with minimal fuss. Emma stood on the periphery, uncertain of her place in this well-choreographed response to whatever threat approached. Nakia appeared at her side, pressing a bundle into her arms. "Come," the older woman said in halting English, one of the few words she had bothered to learn. She tugged at Emma's sleeve, leading her toward the dwelling they shared. "What's happening?" Emma asked, the Apache phrase awkward on her tongue. "Soldiers, coming through pass." Nakia's weathered face creased with concern. "Looking for stolen white woman." Emma's heart leapt. Someone was searching for her. Perhaps her father or brother had survived after all, had raised an alarm, had convinced the army to mount a rescue, or perhaps it was merely Jacob Reed, having enlisted official help with a story of Apache raiders, stealing his property. "I should go to them," Emma said slowly. "Explain what happened." Nakia's grip on her arm tightened painfully. Soldiers do not listen. Soldiers shoot, then ask questions to the dead. She pushed Emma through the dwelling. Entrance, you stay, Maka will decide. And inside, Emma found two young Apache mothers already waiting, their small children clutched close. One, a girl barely 14, held a newborn to her breast, her eyes wide with fear. The other, the woman who had gifted Emma the beaded bracelet, nodded a greeting but said nothing. Understanding dawned. This was a shelter for those most vulnerable, those who would be gathered for protection, while warriors prepared to defend the settlement if necessary. Emma had been placed among them, not as a prisoner, but as someone to be protected. The realization stirred conflicting emotions. On one hand, she was touched by the implicit acceptance, the assumption that her safety mattered to the community. On the other, she chafed at being hidden away when her presence might prevent bloodshed. If soldiers truly were searching for a captive white woman, she could end the confrontation peacefully by simply walking out to meet them. Unless, of course, they weren't actually looking for her at all. The flap of the dwelling opened, and Maka entered, bringing with him a gust of cold air and grim purpose. His gaze swept over the assembled women before settling on Emma. "You must decide quickly," he said without preamble. "A patrol of 15 soldiers approaches from the east. Their guide is the tall man who was with those who took you." Emma's breath caught. Fletcher. The name came to her suddenly. She had heard Jacob Reed call the tall outlaw by that name during her captivity. He's not a soldier. No, but he leads them here, telling tales of a white woman stolen by savages. Maka's expression remained neutral, but Emma had learned to read the tension in his shoulders, the slight narrowing of his eyes that betrayed deeper emotion. "If they find our winter camp, there will be blood. Let me go to them," Emma said, rising to her feet. "I can tell them the truth, that your people rescued me, that the real criminals are Jacob Reed and his gang. And they will believe a woman who wears Apache dress, who speaks our tongue, who has lived among us for moons?" Maka's tone held no mockery, only a weary understanding of the reality they faced. "They will say we bewitched you, that your mind is broken from captivity." Emma wanted to deny it, but she knew he spoke truth. The frontier was built on fear as much as courage, on prejudice as much as pioneer spirit. A woman who had gone native would not be considered reliable regardless of her actual experiences. Then what would you have me do? Maka studied her for a long moment, his dark eyes unreadable. "We will move the camp tonight, deeper into the mountains where soldiers on horseback cannot follow. You have a choice. Come with us, or we will leave you near enough to the patrol that they will find you by morning." The choice hung in the air between them, monumental in its implications. To leave with the soldiers meant returning to white society, to the possibility of learning her family's fate, to the familiar structures and expectations of her former life. It also meant abandoning the people who had saved her, who had taught her, who had slowly become a kind of family during the long winter months. "If I go with the soldiers," Emma said carefully, "what story should I tell?" Maka's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Whatever story keeps you safe," he replied. "We ask only that you lead them away from our trail, not toward it." The simplicity of the request, not a demand for loyalty, not a plea for protection, but merely the basic courtesy of not actively endangering those who had sheltered her, struck Emma deeply. How little they expected from the white world, and how rarely even that little was granted. "I'm not going with the soldiers," she said with sudden certainty. Surprise flickered across Maka's features. "The winter is not yet over. The journey will be hard." "I know." Emma squared her shoulders. "But I've made my choice." Within the hour, Shadow Canyon was transformed. Dwellings were dismantled. Belongings packed onto travois pulled by horses and dogs, fires extinguished, and the ashes scattered to prevent any trace from remaining. Emma worked alongside the others, her hands sure now with tasks that would have baffled her months earlier. The evacuation proceeded in near silence, even the smallest children seeming to understand the need for quiet. By moonrise, a ghostly procession wound its way up a narrow game trail that switchbacked up the canyon wall, disappearing into the dense pine forest that crowned the ridge. Emma walked near the middle of the line, leading a pack horse loaded with Nakia's belongings and medical supplies. The bitter cold cut through her layers of buckskin and fur, but she had learned to move continuously to maintain warmth, to cover her face against the wind, to place each foot deliberately to avoid breaking through snowcrust. Maka moved throughout the column, sometimes scouting ahead, sometimes dropping back to check on stragglers. Whenever he passed Emma, his gaze would meet hers briefly, something unspoken passing between them, acknowledgement perhaps of the significance of her choice. They traveled through the night, following routes that seemed invisible to Emma's eyes, but which Maka and the other warriors navigated with confidence. By dawn, they had reached a sheltered basin high in the mountains, ringed by ancient pines and sheltered from the worst of the wind. Here they established a temporary camp, not the full settlement of Shadow Canyon, but enough to provide rest before continuing their journey the following night. As Emma helped erect a simple shelter, her muscles aching with fatigue, Tokala approached. His English was better than most in the band, having spent 2 years on a reservation where missionaries had established a school. "Maka says you chose to stay," he said without preamble, his tone neutral but his eyes assessing. "Why?" Emma considered the question as she secured a pine bough across the shelter frame. "Because a debt cannot be repaid by betrayal," she replied finally. Tokala's expression remained impassive. "You feel you owe us." "Yes, but it's more than that." Emma straightened, meeting his gaze directly. "I've lived among you for months now. I've shared your food, learned your ways, heard your children's laughter. How could I bring destruction to your doorstep? Many white eyes would not hesitate. I'm not many white eyes." Emma touched the beaded bracelet at her wrist. "I'm just me." Tokala studied her for a long moment, then gave a slight nod. "Maka saw something in you that night in the canyon. Now others begin to see it too." With that cryptic statement, he moved away, returning to his duties. The temporary camp settled into an uneasy rest, with warriors taking turns standing, watch on the surrounding ridges. Emma, exhausted from the night's journey, slept fitfully in the shelter she shared with Nakia and 2 other women. Her dreams were troubled, soldiers with Fletcher's face, burning cabins that became burning teepees, her brother Samuel calling her name across an uncrossable chasm. She woke at dusk to find Maka crouched at the shelter entrance, his expression grave. "The soldiers found Shadow Canyon," he said without preamble. "They follow our trail." Emma's stomach clenched. "How is that possible? We were so careful." "The man Fletcher is a good tracker, better than I believed." Maka's tone held reluctant respect. "We move again tonight, but differently. The band will split. Women, children, and elders will go north toward the high lakes. Warriors will lead the soldiers west, away from the others." "And me?" Emma asked quietly. Maka hesitated, an unusual gesture for a man who typically spoke and acted with absolute certainty. "That depends on whether you still wish to return to your people." "They're hunting us like animals," Emma said, a spark of anger kindling in her chest. "Those aren't my people." Something shifted in Maka's expression, a softening around the eyes, perhaps, or a slight easing of the tension in his jaw. "Then you go with Nakia and the others. I have told them you are to be treated as one of our own." The simple declaration, "one of our own," affected Emma more deeply than she could have anticipated. After months of existing in the liminal space between captive and guest, between outsider and community member, to be claimed so directly felt like stepping into solid ground after walking on ice. "Be careful," she said impulsively, reaching out to touch his arm. "Fletcher is dangerous, and if the soldiers believe you've harmed a white woman—" "I have led my people through worse storms," Maka replied, but he did not pull away from her touch. "We will meet again at the summer gathering place when the snow melts from the passes." With that promise, he was gone, moving through the camp to make final preparations for the band's division. Emma watched him go, an unfamiliar ache in her chest that had nothing to do with the cold or the exertion of their journey. The women, children, and elders departed first, traveling north along a ridge that offered concealment while avoiding the deepest snowdrifts. Emma walked beside Nakia, whose age did nothing to slow her determined pace. They moved in silence through the star-bright night, each lost in private thoughts as the miles accumulated beneath their moccasined feet. 3 days of hard travel brought them to their destination, a series of caves nestled in a rocky outcropping overlooking a frozen lake. Here, Emma learned, the band had weathered difficult times before, the natural shelters offering protection from both elements and enemies. The caves retained heat from small, carefully ventilated fires, and the surrounding forest provided adequate game despite the season. Life quickly organized itself around the rhythms of survival. The women established routines for gathering wood, melting snow for water, preparing food, and caring for the children. Emma found herself increasingly relied upon, her strength and newly acquired skills making her a valuable member of the reduced community. She took particular responsibility for the youngest children, organizing games and telling stories to keep their spirits up during the cramped confinement of stormy days. Weeks passed with no word from Maka and the warriors. Emma caught the women exchanging worried glances when they thought no one was watching, but none spoke openly of their fears. The resilience of these people, their capacity to endure uncertainty and hardship without complaint, humbled her daily. One evening, as Emma sat mending a child's torn moccasin by firelight, Nakia settled beside her with a small wooden box in her gnarled hands. Without speaking, she opened it to reveal a collection of beads, porcupine quills, and sinew thread. "For you," the older woman said in Apache, tapping Emma's chest. "Make medicine." Emma looked at the materials in confusion. "I don't understand." Nakia took Emma's left hand, turning it palm up and tracing the lifeline with a weathered finger. "Your old life," she said, then drew an intersecting line. "New life, need medicine to hold both." Understanding dawned slowly. Nakia was suggesting she create something, a talisman or ornament, that would help her reconcile the different parts of her identity, that would serve as physical representation of her journey from Emma Wilson, Boston schoolteacher and frontier, new daughter, to the woman she was becoming among the Apache. With Nakia's patient guidance, Emma began crafting a necklace unlike anything she would have worn in her previous life. Into it, she wove symbols that bridged her two worlds. A small wooden book representing her love of learning, a claw from a mountain lion symbolizing the strength she had discovered within herself, beads arranged in patterns that told the story of her rescue and rebirth among the Apache. The work occupied her hands and mind during the long evenings, becoming a meditation of sorts on all that had been lost and found since the night Outlaws had destroyed her family's homestead. As the necklace took shape, so too did Emma's understanding of herself, not as a woman torn between worlds, but as one whose unique path had given her perspectives few would ever know. Spring announced itself with the drip of melting icicles and the gradual emergence of bare ground around the bases of trees. The lake ice thinned at the edges, revealing glimpses of dark water beneath. Birds return to the high country. There calls a welcome counterpoint to the winter silence that had enveloped the mountains for so long. Still, no word came from Maka and the warriors. The designated time for reuniting at the summer gathering place approached, creating an air of anticipation and anxiety throughout the small community. Preparations began for breaking camp. Hides packed, tools bundled, stores of dried meat and preserved berries distributed among the women to carry. 3 days before their planned departure, as Emma gathered firewood on the hillside above the caves, a flash of movement in the valley below caught her attention. She froze, ducking behind a pine trunk, her heart racing. After months of living with the Apache, caution had become instinct. A lone figure moved through the trees, a man on foot, traveling with the deliberate care of someone following a faint trail. Even at this distance, something in the set of his shoulders, the rhythm of his gait, struck Emma as familiar. She abandoned her bundle of firewood and moved higher on the hillside, seeking a better vantage point without exposing herself. The man continued his steady advance toward the caves, unaware of her observation. When he emerged briefly into a small clearing, sunlight illuminated his features and Emma's breath caught. Samuel, her brother, older, leaner, his boyish features hardened into early manhood, but unmistakably Samuel Wilson. He was alive, and he was tracking the Apache band with single-minded focus. Emma's first instinct was to call out, to run down the hillside and throw herself into her brother's arms. Joy surged through her, almost overwhelming in its intensity after months of uncertainty and grief. Her family, at least part of it, had survived the fire, but caution tempered her reaction. Samuel was alone, moving with the stealth of a hunter rather than the openness of someone seeking peaceful contact. Why had he separated from the soldiers? What did he intend upon finding the Apache? And most troubling, how would he react to seeing his sister dressed in buckskins, living among the people he likely believed had kidnapped her? The complexities of the situation froze Emma in place, watching as her brother continued his careful advance. She needed to reach him first to explain before he encountered the others, to prevent any misunderstanding that might lead to violence. Moving quietly through the underbrush, Emma circled around to intercept Samuel's path. She rehearsed words in her mind, trying to find language that would bridge the vast gulf between the sister he had known and the woman she had become. How to explain that she had chosen this life, at least temporarily. That the Apache were not her captors, but her protectors. She positioned herself behind a fallen log where his trail would bring him within a few yards of her hiding place. Minutes stretched into an hour as she waited, listening to the soft sounds of his approach, the occasional snap of a twig, the whisper of pine needles beneath moccasined feet. Samuel had learned to move quietly in the wilderness during her absence, becoming nearly as stealthy as the Apache warriors who had taught her similar skills. When he finally came into view, Emma's chest tightened with emotion. His face was gaunter than she remembered, a new scar running along his jawline. He carried a Winchester rifle with the ease of long familiarity, his eyes constantly scanning the forest around him. "Samuel," she called softly, rising slowly from her concealment with empty hands held outward in the Apache gesture of peace. He whirled toward her voice, rifle halfway to his shoulder before recognition dawned. "Emma?" The weapon lowered incrementally, disbelief warring with hope in his expression. "Emma, is that really you?" "It's me, Sam." She stepped forward cautiously, aware of how strange she must appear to him in her Apache clothing, her skin darkened by sun and smoke, her hair braided, in the style Nakia had taught her. Samuel stared as if seeing a ghost, his eyes tracking over her transformed appearance. "They said, Fletcher claimed the Apaches took you." His voice hardened, "Said they'd turned you into one of them." "Fletcher lied," Emma replied firmly. "The Apache rescued me from Reed's men. They've protected me all winter." She took another step toward him. "Samuel, what happened that night?" "Father..." Pain flashed across his features. "Father didn't make it. The fire." He swallowed hard. "I dragged him out, but his wounds were too severe." Grief pierced Emma anew, but she had expected this confirmation. Somehow, in the depths of her heart, she had known her father was gone. "And you? How did you survive?" "Neighbors saw the smoke, came to help." Samuel's gaze hardened. "By then, Reed and his men were long gone with you. I've been tracking them ever since, as soon as I healed enough to ride." "You've been searching for me all this time?" Emma felt a rush of love for her brother, this boy forced too quickly into manhood who had refused to abandon hope of finding her. Samuel nodded grimly. "Joined up with the army patrol last month when we heard rumors of a white woman living with Apaches." His eyes narrowed. "Emma, we need to go, now. The others are camped 10 miles south. Fletcher and Captain Bryce, the patrol leader." Emma didn't move. "Samuel, listen to me. These people saved my life. They've cared for me, taught me to survive. I can't let you bring soldiers here." Confusion and the first stirrings of anger crossed her brother's face. "What are you saying? These are savages, Emma. They've obviously confused you, maybe threatened you to cooperate." "No." Emma's voice was firm. "That's what Fletcher wants everyone to believe. But it's a lie. Reed and his men were the savages. They murdered father, burned our home, kidnapped me for ransom." Her voice grew passionate. "The Apache found me when Reed's gang was ambushed. Their chief, Maka, brought me to their winter camp when I had nowhere else to go." Samuel's expression flickered between doubt and confusion. The rifle lowered further, though he kept it ready. "If what you're saying is true, why didn't you try to come home? To find me?" "I tried once," Emma admitted. "Nearly froze to death in the attempt. The mountains in winter are unforgiving, Sam." She gestured to the surrounding wilderness. "And where was home? Our cabin was ashes. I had no way of knowing. You had survived." A tense silence stretched between them, brother and sister separated by more than the few yards of forest floor. Months of divergent experiences had created a chasm that simple blood ties couldn't immediately bridge. "There are women and children in those caves, Samuel," Emma said quietly. "Families just trying to survive like we were. The men are gone. They led the soldiers away to protect the vulnerable." Samuel's gaze shifted toward the rocky outcropping, visible through the trees. "Fletcher said they were dangerous, that they'd attack settlements when spring came." "Fletcher is working with Jacob Reed," Emma countered. "The man who murdered our father. Who do you trust more, him or me?" The question hung in the cool spring air, weighted with implications. Samuel studied her face, searching perhaps for traces of the sister he remembered beneath the changes wrought by months among the Apache. "You've changed," he said finally, an observation rather than an accusation. Emma nodded. "Yes, so have you." Another silence, less tense than before. A jay called from a nearby pine, its harsh cry emphasizing the stillness between them. "What do you want me to do, Emma?" Samuel asked at last. "I can't just let you stay here with them." "I don't intend to stay forever," she replied. "But I won't leave until Maka returns. I owe him and his people that much." She took a deep breath. "Help me, Samuel. Go back to the patrol. Tell them you found signs that the band has moved west, deeper into the mountains. Buy us time until the warriors return, and we can travel safely to neutral ground." Samuel's internal struggle played across his features, loyalty to his sister, warring with months of believing the worst, with the prejudices that frontier life had instilled. "And if I refuse?" "Then I'll warn the others," Emma said simply. "They'll disappear into the mountains where no patrol will find them, and you'll never see me again." The stark choice hung between them. Samuel's jaw worked silently, his fingers tightening on the rifle's stock. For a terrible moment, Emma feared she had misjudged, that the brother she had known had been replaced entirely by a stranger, hardened by grief and vengeance. Then with a stuttering exhale, Samuel lowered the rifle completely. 2 days, he said. I'll lead the patrol west. Tell them I found tracks heading toward the old mining valleys. But in 2 days, I'm coming back. His gaze locked with hers. And you'd better be here, Emma. I can't lose you again. Relief washed through her. I'll be here, I promise. Samuel nodded once, then hesitated. This chief, Maka, are you? He struggled to form the question. Emma understood what he couldn't bring himself to ask. He treated me with respect, Samuel. They all did. She touched the necklace she had crafted under Nakia's guidance. I'm still me, just more than I was before. Something like acceptance crossed Samuel's face. Without another word, he turned and moved back down the trail, disappearing into the forest as quietly as he had come. Emma watched until the last flash of his buckskin jacket vanished among the trees, her heart both lighter and heavier than before. When she returned to the caves, she found Nakia waiting, as if the old woman had sensed the encounter. Brother, the elder said in Apache, the word, not a question, but a statement. Yes, Emma confirmed in the same language. He lives. Nakia studied her face with eyes that seemed to see far deeper than skin. You will go? Emma hesitated. The reality of Samuel's survival changed everything. She had family, a connection to her former world that she had believed severed forever. Yet the thought of leaving Shadow Canyon, of saying goodbye to Nakia, to the children who now came to her for stories, to the life she had built here, and to Maka, when he returned, created an ache deep in her chest. Not yet, she replied. Finally. First, Maka must return, all must be safe. Nakia nodded, as if this answer confirmed something she had already known. The heart finds its true path, even when the feet must walk 2 roads. That evening, as the community gathered around the central fire, Emma shared the news of her brother's visit and his agreement to mislead the patrol. Relief spread through the group, though caution tempered their response. They had survived too many broken promises to fully trust the word of a white man, even one connected to Emma by blood. 2 days passed with agonizing slowness. Emma found herself constantly scanning the horizon, torn between hope for Samuel's return and anxiety over Maka's continued absence. The women prepared to move camp, packing their meager belongings and readying the children for travel, but all waited for Emma's brother to return before beginning the journey to the summer gathering place. On the morning of the 3rd day, Emma climbed to a high vantage point above the caves, a place where she could watch both the northern trail that Maka would follow and the southern approach where Samuel would appear. The spring air held a fragrant sharpness, pine sap warming in the strengthening sun. The first wildflowers pushing through patches of retreating snow. In another lifetime, she would have appreciated the beauty without reservation. Now every sense remained alert for movement, for danger, for the return of the men around whom her divided heart revolved. Midday came and went. Emma chewed absently on pemmican, her eyes never leaving the trails below. Birds called to each other in the forest canopy, their ordinary business continuing despite human concerns. A marmot sunned itself on a nearby rock, regarding her with casual interest, before returning to its grooming. The first sign came from the north, a flash of movement among the distant trees. Then another. Emma tensed, straining her eyes against the glare of sun on lingering snow patches. Riders emerged from the forest shadow, moving with the fluid grace she had come to associate with Apache horsemen. She counted 5, then 7, then 12, as more appeared from the tree line. Maka, rode at their head, his straight-backed posture unmistakable even at this distance. Emma's heart leapt at the sight, relief washing through her. The warriors had returned, not all of them, she noted with a pang as she continued counting, but enough to suggest they had evaded the worst of the soldiers' pursuit. She was about to descend and bring news to the others when movement on the southern trail caught her attention. A lone figure on horseback approached, moving at a steady pace that suggested purpose rather than caution. Samuel, returning as promised. Emma froze, caught between conflicting urgencies. The returning warriors would reach the caves before Samuel, and they would be vigilant, weapons ready, after weeks of evading soldiers. They might shoot first at the sight of a white man approaching their sanctuary, especially one dressed in frontier clothing and carrying a rifle. Decision made, Emma scrambled down from her lookout, half running, half sliding down the steep slope, toward the northern trail. She had to reach Maka first, had to explain Samuel's presence before a tragic misunderstanding occurred. Her moccasins found purchase on the rocky ground as she pushed herself to greater speed, ignoring the burn in her lungs and legs. She intercepted the warriors at a bend in the trail, bursting from the underbrush with her hands raised in the Apache gesture of peace. The lead riders reined in sharply, hands dropping to weapons before recognition dawned. "Emma!" Maka's voice carried surprise and something more complex, relief perhaps or pleasure at seeing her safe. "My brother comes," she gasped out in Apache, the words tumbling over one another in her haste. "From the south, he helps us, no soldiers." Maka's expression sharpened with suspicion. "Brother? You told no one of family that lived." "I thought him dead," Emma explained, switching to English in her agitation. "The fire, I believed no one survived, but he found me 2 days ago. He's been leading the soldiers away to give us time." Tokala moved his horse forward, his face set in hard lines, "or bringing them to us now." Emma shook her head vehemently. "No, he comes alone, to help me, to meet with you peacefully." She turned her gaze directly to Maka, willing him to believe her. "I trust him with my life, with all your lives." A weighted silence followed, broken only by the soft nickering of tired horses and the whisper of wind through pine needles. Maka studied her face with the intensity she had come to expect from him, looking beyond words to the truth beneath them. "Where are the others?" he asked finally. "Still at the caves, safe." Emma gestured toward the southern trail. "Samuel will reach them soon if we don't intercept him. Please, Maka, let me bring him to you in peace." After another moment of consideration, Maka nodded once. "3 warriors with you, the rest continue to the caves." He issued rapid instructions in Apache, detailing positions and signals. Emma felt a rush of gratitude so intense it nearly brought tears to her eyes. "Thank you." Maka dismounted in a fluid motion and handed her the reins. "I will come too." To her surprise, he added, "I would meet this brother who shares your courage." They rode together toward the southern approach, Emma, Maka, and 2 warriors whose names she knew as Akule and Hinto. They positioned themselves at a bend in the trail where the forest opened briefly into a small meadow, a natural meeting place that offered visibility while keeping the warriors concealed among the trees. Samuel appeared minutes later, riding slowly on a dun gelding that had seen better days. His rifle remained in its scabbard, but Emma noted the pistol at his waist and the wariness in his posture. He pulled up short at the sight of her waiting in the clearing, his gaze immediately scanning the tree line. "You're not alone," he observed quietly. Not a question, but a statement. Emma nodded. "Maka has returned with his warriors. They've agreed to meet you peacefully." She stepped her mount closer to her brothers, lowering her voice. "The soldiers headed west, following false tracks I laid." Samuel's eyes never stopped moving, scanning the surrounding forest. Captain Bryce was suspicious, but Fletcher convinced him it was the right trail. They're at least 2 days' ride from here now. Relief flooded through Emma. You actually did it. The ghost of a smile touched Samuel's lips. Promised, didn't I? The smile faded as he noted movement among the trees. Them. Maka emerged from the forest shadow, unarmed, but for the knife at his waist. He walked forward with measured steps, stopping several yards from the siblings, his posture neither threatening nor submissive. For a long moment, the two men assessed each other in silence. Emma held her breath, acutely aware of the historical weight of this moment. A frontier boy who had lost everything to violence, face to face with an Apache chief whose people had suffered generations of similar losses. "You are Samuel, brother of Emma," Maka stated finally, his English crisp despite the accent. Samuel nodded once. "And you're Maka." His gaze flicked briefly to Emma before returning to the chief. "My sister says you saved her life." "Your sister saved her own life many times," Maka replied. "I merely provided shelter from winter." The simple statement, giving Emma credit for her own survival rather than claiming her as some sort of rescued damsel, seemed to surprise Samuel. Some of the tension eased from his shoulders. "I've led the patrol away," he said. "But they'll figure out they're on a false trail eventually. Captain Bryce isn't a fool." Maka inclined his head slightly in acknowledgement. "We leave for summer grounds today, high meadows where no horses can follow without being seen for miles." "And Emma?" Samuel asked, the question direct. A heartbeat of silence. Maka didn't look at Emma as he answered, his gaze steady on Samuel. "That is for her to decide." Samuel turned to his sister, the question written in his eyes. Emma realized with sudden clarity that this was the moment of choice she had been moving toward since the night of fire and blood that had torn her from her former life. Her brother represented a return to all she had known. Civilization, structure, the familiar paths of a white woman's existence. Maka offered something different. Freedom, self-reliance, a life defined by skills rather than social expectations. "I need to know what happened to Jacob Reed," she said, surprising both men with this divergence. "He murdered our father, burned our home, would have sold me or killed me if the Apache hadn't intervened." Samuel's expression darkened. "Reed's still out there. Fletcher claims they parted ways after the Apache attack, but I don't believe him. They're working together somehow." Maka's gaze sharpened with interest. "The scarred man lives?" "Yes," Samuel confirmed. "And he hasn't forgotten Emma. Fletcher let slip once that Reed has some kind of obsession with finding her again, says she's unfinished business." A chill ran down Emma's spine at the words. In the months of relative safety among the Apache, she had allowed herself to believe that chapter of her life closed. Now the specter of Jacob Reed rose again, a malevolent shadow reaching toward her across the mountains. "Then I can't go back to Copper Springs," she said slowly. "Not yet. Not while he's still free." Samuel leaned forward in his saddle. "Emma, you can't keep hiding in the wilderness. These people have their own troubles without adding yours to them." "Your sister does not bring trouble," Maka interjected, his tone carrying a hint of steel beneath its calm surface. "She brings strength to our band. The children learn from her. The women value her skills." The assertion of Emma's worth to the Apache community hung in the air between them, charged with unspoken implications. Samuel studied the chief with new intensity, recognizing perhaps for the first time that his sister's connection to these people ran deeper than mere gratitude or necessity. "You care for her," he said flatly. Maka didn't flinch from the direct confrontation. "I respect her courage, her intelligence, her heart." His gaze finally shifted to Emma, something softening in his expression. "Whether she stays or goes, She carries the respect of the Apache." The words were formal, proper, but Emma heard the deeper message beneath them. Marka would not pressure her to stay, would not use emotional leverage to influence her choice. Whatever decision she made would be truly her own. "I could come with you," Samuel suggested unexpectedly, "to your summer grounds, just until we figure out what to do about Reed." He gestured toward the mountains. "I'm not bad at tracking, hunting. I could pull my weight." The offer stunned Emma. Her brother willingly entering an Apache camp, offering to live among people he had been raised to fear and distrust. It was nearly unthinkable, and yet the sincerity in his voice was unmistakable. Marka's surprise showed only in the slight raising of an eyebrow. He considered the proposal for a long moment, then spoke in rapid Apache to the warriors waiting at the forest edge. A brief discussion followed before he turned back to Samuel. "The council would need to approve," he said carefully, "but until then, you may travel with us under my protection." Relief and something like wonder spread through Emma. The two, as of her divided existence, her blood family and her adopted community, might actually find a way to coexist, at least temporarily. It was more than she had dared hope for when Samuel first appeared in the forest. "We should get moving," she suggested, aware that daylight was wasting and the band had a long journey ahead. "The others are waiting." As they rode toward the caves, Emma found herself between her brother and Marka, a living bridge between worlds that had previously existed in violent opposition. The symbolism wasn't lost on her, nor was the fragility of this newfound peace. One misstep, one misunderstanding, could shatter everything. The reception at the caves was predictably cautious. The women gathered the children close as Samuel dismounted, his height and obvious strength marking him as a potential threat despite Emma's reassurances. Nakia, however, approached without fear, her ancient eyes taking in the young man with frank assessment. "He has your mother's chin," she said to Emma in Apache, surprising her with this insight. Emma hadn't noticed the resemblance herself, but looking at her brother now, she could see the echo of their mother's determined jawline in his profile. "Yes," she agreed softly, "he does." The band moved out before midday, traveling light and fast along routes known only to the Apache. Samuel kept pace without complaint, adapting to their methods with the same frontier resourcefulness that had helped Emma survive her first difficult weeks among them. By nightfall, they had put considerable distance between themselves and the caves, making camp in a sheltered hollow where spring had already coaxed green shoots from the dark earth. As the camp settled for the night, Emma found herself seated between Samuel and Marka at the small fire, an unexpected family tableau that would have been unimaginable months earlier. The conversation flowed haltingly at first, bridging cultural and linguistic gaps with effort on all sides, but gradually finding a rhythm. Samuel shared what he knew of Reed and Fletcher's movements since the night of the attack, their return to Copper Springs weeks later, spreading tales of Apache raids, their recruitment of the Army Patrol under false pretenses, their obvious search for something beyond mere vengeance. Fletcher kept asking about some kind of map, Samuel recalled, accepting a cup of pine needle tea from Nakia with a nod of thanks. Said Reed was convinced your father had it hidden somewhere. Emma frowned, stirring the fire with a stick. Map? What kind of map? Gold, most likely. Samuel shrugged. There have been rumors for years about lost Spanish mines in these mountains. Maybe father found something during his hunting trips. Maka listened intently, his expression thoughtful. The scarred man believes this map survived the fire, or that Emma took it with her. Samuel glanced at his sister. Did father ever mention anything like that to you? Emma shook her head slowly, then paused as a memory surfaced. Wait, there was something. She reached for the leather pouch at her waist, the one containing her mother's locket. The night before the attack, Father spent a long time cleaning and checking his rifle. He seemed preoccupied. When I asked what was troubling him, he said sometimes a man finds more than he's looking for in the wilderness. She opened the locket, examining the familiar portrait of her mother with new eyes. I never thought much about it, but... She stopped abruptly, fingering the edge of the portrait where it sat in the silver frame. This feels different. Working carefully with her fingernail, Emma pried at the portrait's edge. The backing separated with surprising ease, revealing a tightly folded scrap of paper hidden behind the image. Her heart racing, she extracted it gently and unfolded it on her palm. What emerged was not a traditional map, but a detailed drawing, with notations in her father's distinctive handwriting, a mountain peak with a distinctive split top, a winding river course, markers for cave entrances and rock formations, and finally, an X marked beside what appeared to be a waterfall. He hid it with me, Emma whispered, awe and grief mingling in her voice. All this time. Samuel leaned closer, studying the crude map. Looks like the western ridge of Sierra Madre. He glanced up. Near Devil's Backbone Gorge. Maka's eyes narrowed at the mention. Where we found you. Emma nodded slowly, connections forming in her mind. Reed must have learned Father found something valuable. That's why he came that night. The ransom demand was just a cover. He was really searching for this. She touched the fragile paper with trembling fingers. Father died protecting it, and Reed has been hunting you ever since, hoping you had it with you. Samuel's expression hardened. The bastard. Silence fell around the fire as they contemplated the implications. Emma felt the weight of her father's final legacy in her hands, a secret he had literally entrusted to her heart, hidden against the image of the woman they had both loved. What will you do with it? Maka asked finally, his tone carefully neutral. Emma looked up, meeting his gaze across the flickering flames. I don't know, she admitted. I never wanted gold or riches. I just wanted... She trailed off, uncertain how to articulate what she had truly desired: security, purpose, connection. We could use it, Samuel suggested, voice low with suppressed excitement. Rebuild the homestead. Make a new start. The offer was tempting, a chance to reclaim what had been taken, to honor their father's discovery by using it to restore their family legacy. Yet something held Emma back from immediate agreement. And Reed, she asked, he won't stop looking. Then we stop him first. Samuel's jaw set in a hard line reminiscent of their father. End this once and for all. Maka observed the exchange without comment, but Emma could sense his assessment of her brother's growing bloodlust. Violence begetting violence was the cycle that had defined the frontier for generations, perpetuating hatred between peoples who might otherwise have found ways to coexist. There has been enough death, she said firmly. I won't have more blood. She'd over this. She carefully refolded the map and tucked it back into her mother's locket. For now, this stays with me. We need time to think, to plan carefully. Samuel looked ready to argue, but something in Emma's expression stopped him. She was no longer the sister he had known, the somewhat sheltered young woman who deferred to male authority. Months among the Apache had honed not just her survival skills, but her confidence, her willingness to stand firm in her convictions. We should rest, Maka suggested, rising smoothly to his feet. Tomorrow's journey will be longer. As the camp settled for the night, Emma found sleep elusive. The discovery of the map had reopened wounds she thought had begun to heal, bringing fresh grief for her father alongside renewed fear of Jacob Reed's obsessive pursuit. She slipped away from the sleeping camp, seeking solitude beneath the star-filled sky. A nearby stream provided a natural destination, its gentle murmur a counterpoint to her troubled thoughts. Emma sat on a boulder at the water's edge, her mother's locket cradled in her palms, the weight of family legacy and uncertain future pressing down upon her. "You should not wander alone." Marka's voice came quietly from behind her. "The night holds dangers." Emma didn't turn, not surprised by his ability to move silently or his awareness of her absence from camp. "I needed to think." He settled beside her on the boulder, a respectful distance between them. For several minutes, they simply existed in companionable silence, listening to the stream's constant conversation with the stones in its bed. "The map troubles you," Marka observed finally. Emma nodded. "It changes things, gives Samuel hope for a future I'm not sure I want anymore." She glanced sideways at the chief's strong profile. "Before he came, I had almost decided to stay with the band through summer, to see if I could truly belong among your people." Marka absorbed this revelation without visible reaction, though Emma sensed a subtle shift in his energy. "And now I don't know." She opened the locket, the silver catching moonlight. "This represents everything I was before, my family, my old life, but the woman who wore this originally wouldn't recognize me now." A wry smile touched her lips. She certainly never imagined her daughter living with the Apache, wearing buckskins instead of proper dresses, speaking a language she would have considered savage. "Your mother would see your strength," Marka countered quietly, "as I do." The simple statement warmed something deep within Emma. My world had such rigid ideas about women's capabilities. Here, I've learned I can hunt, track, survive, make my own decisions. The band respects this about you. Marka turned slightly, his dark eyes meeting hers. "I respect this about you." The air between them seemed to still, charged with unspoken possibilities. Emma was acutely aware of his presence, the breadth of his shoulders silhouetted against the starlit sky, the subtle scent of pine and leather that accompanied him, the controlled power in his stillness. "If I stay," she said softly, the question implicit in her tone. Marka considered his response carefully, as he did all things. "If you stay, you would be welcome as one who has earned her place, not as an outsider, not as my..." He paused, searching for the right word. "Not as anyone's possession, as Emma, who chooses her own path." Or the distinction was important, a recognition of her independence, her agency in determining her future. Among her own people, a woman alone faced limited options, most involving dependency on male protection and provision. Marka offered something different, community without subjugation, belonging without surrender of self. "And my brother?" she asked. "He may stay as long as he respects our ways." Marka's expression grew more serious. "But his heart holds anger that must heal before he finds peace, this vengeance he seeks." He shook his head slightly. "It will consume him if he feeds it." Emma knew he spoke truth. She had seen the hardening in Samuel, the way grief had calcified into rage directed at convenient targets. First the Apache who he believed had taken her, now Reed and Fletcher who had destroyed their family. That rage might protect him in the brutal reality of frontier life, but it would also isolate him from the possibility of genuine connection, of finding joy beyond revenge. "I don't want to lose him again," she admitted. "But I'm not sure I can go back to being the person he remembers either." Marka nodded in understanding. "The river changes as it flows. What was cannot be again." His hand moved hesitantly, coming to rest lightly against hers on the cool stone between them. "But new waters may run deeper, stronger than before." The touch, so restrained and yet so intimate, sent awareness cascading through Emma's body. In all their months together, Maka had maintained careful distance, respecting both Apache customs regarding unmarried women and the complicated position she occupied within the band. This deliberate bridging of that gap felt momentous, a silent acknowledgement of something growing between them that transcended cultural boundaries. Emma turned her hand beneath his, their fingers intertwining in the darkness. No words were necessary as they sat together beside the flowing water, each understanding that whatever path she ultimately chose, this moment of connection would remain. A touchstone, proof that even across the vast divides of culture and experience, human hearts could find common ground. When they eventually returned to camp, walking side by side beneath the wheeling stars, Emma felt a curious peace settling within her, despite the uncertainties that still lay ahead. The map, hidden in her mother's locket, represented one possible future. The strong, silent man beside her represented another. Both held promise, both held risk. For tonight, it was enough to know that the choice remained hers to make. Dawn arrived with pearl-grey light, filtering through morning mist, revealing a camp already stirring with purposeful activity. The Apache traveled efficiently, their generations of nomadic experience evident in the smooth choreography of breaking. Camp, dwellings disassembled, belongings packed, children organized, all with minimal fuss or wasted motion. Emma found Samuel standing apart, observing the process with undisguised fascination. "They move like they've done this 1,000 times, he remarked as she joined him. "They have," Emma replied. "This rhythm of seasonal migration is in their blood. Nakia told me her grandmother's grandmother followed these same trails." Samuel nodded slowly, absorbing this perspective on a people he had been taught to view as primitive wanderers rather than keepers of ancient traditions. "It's not what I expected," he admitted. "They're so organized, disciplined, skilled," Emma supplied with a slight smile. "Human," Samuel finished quietly. "The stories you hear in town, they make them sound like animals." Emma's heart lightened at this evidence of her brother's evolving understanding. "Those stories serve a purpose, Sam. If settlers saw the Apache as fully human, with their own complex cultures and valid claims to the land, it would be harder to justify taking that land from them." Samuel shot her a surprised look, perhaps not expecting such political awareness from his formerly conventional sister. Before he could respond, Tokala approached, his expression uncharacteristically troubled. "Riders coming, from the east." He gestured toward the ridgeline visible through the morning haze. "Many." Samuel tensed, hand dropping instinctively to his pistol. "The patrol." "Too soon," Emma countered, alarm rising. "You said they were 2 days' ride from here." Maka joined them, a spyglass, likely traded for or taken from settlers, extended toward the distant riders. After a moment of observation, his expression hardened. Not soldiers, the scarred man, and many guns. Emma's blood ran cold. Jacob Reed had found them somehow, had assembled what looked like a small private army. Samuel grabbed the spyglass, confirming with a curse what Maka had seen. "Fletcher's with them," he growled. The lying snake must have doubled back, followed my trail, while the patrol continued west. The camp erupted into controlled urgency as Maka issued rapid commands. Warriors prepared weapons, while women gathered children and essential supplies. Emma found herself automatically joining the latter group, helping Nakia bundle medical materials that couldn't be abandoned. "How many?" she asked Samuel when he returned to her side. "At least 15 men," he replied grimly. "Well armed. They'll reach this position within the hour." Maka approached, his war paint already applied in bold red streaks across his cheekbones and forehead. "We cannot outrun them with the children and elders. We must split again." His gaze fixed on Emma. "You and your brother should go with the vulnerable ones. Head north toward the high country. Emma recognized the strategy and the sacrifice it entailed. Maka and his warriors would stay behind, creating a diversion to allow the others to escape. Against Reed's superior numbers, it was a mission that might well prove fatal. "No," she said firmly. "Reed wants me and the map. Let me draw him away instead." Samuel's head snapped toward her. "Emma, you can't." "It makes sense," she insisted, cutting him off. "The band stays together, travels faster without having to create a diversion. Reed follows me, thinking I'm trying to reach the gold." She touched the locket at her throat. "I know these mountains now. I can lead him on a false trail, lose him in the high passes." "You would be hunted like prey," Maka objected, rare emotion breaking through his composed exterior. "I already am," Emma countered. "Have been since the night he took me." She met Maka's gaze directly. "You taught me how to survive. Let me use what I've learned." A tense silence followed, broken only by the distant sounds of approaching horses and the soft cries of frightened children. Samuel and Maka exchanged glances. Two men from entirely different worlds, united in their desire to protect her, yet increasingly aware of her determination to protect herself. "Not alone," Samuel said finally. "I'm coming with you." "As am I," Maka added, his tone brooking no argument. "Tokala will lead the band to the summer grounds. We three will draw the scarred man away, then circle back when it is safe." Emma wanted to object. The chief's place was with his people, especially in times of danger, but she recognized the steel in his expression. This was not merely about strategy or safety. It was about choice, about asserting his right to stand beside her in this most personal of battles. "The three of us, then," she agreed, surprising herself with the fierce joy that rose beneath her fear. Whatever came next, she would face it with her brother at one side and Maka at the other, her past and her possible future united in common purpose. They worked quickly, assembling supplies and planning their route. The band would continue north as originally intended. Emma, Samuel, and Maka would ride southeast, making their presence obvious enough to draw Reed and his men away from the Apache families before losing them in the rugged wilderness where local knowledge would give them the advantage. As the band prepared to depart, Nakia approached Emma, pressing a small leather pouch into her hands. "Medicine," the old woman explained in Apache, "for wounds, for sickness." Her gnarled fingers closed around Emma's. "For courage." Emma embraced her impulsively, this stern teacher who had become something between mother and friend during the long winter months. "I will see you again," she promised in the same language. Nakia's weathered face crinkled in a rare smile. "Yes, the spirits have not finished writing your story, Emma Wilson." Her eyes flickered meaningfully between Maka and Samuel. "Nor have they finished weaving together the paths that must meet in it." With these cryptic words, she turned away, joining the line of women and children already moving north through the forest. Emma watched them go, a lump in her throat for this second family she had found in the wilderness, a family now forced to flee because of dangers that had followed her into their lives. "They're close," Samuel warned, leading 3 horses from the small remuda. "We need to move." Emma mounted the paint mare Maka had given her months earlier, the animal now responding to her commands with the easy partnership born of mutual trust. Samuel and Maka swung into their saddles with similar fluid grace, men who had spent their lives on horseback despite their different cultural backgrounds. "Remember," Maka said as they prepared to ride, "we need only keep the scarred man's attention long enough for the others to reach safety. This is not a battle we seek to win through confrontation." Samuel nodded grimly, though Emma sensed his reluctance to forgo the opportunity for direct vengeance against Reed. "Lead on," he said, deferring to Maka's superior knowledge of the terrain. They rode out of the clearing moments before the first of Reed's men crested the nearby ridge. Making no attempt to conceal their departure, Emma felt eyes on her back as they galloped into the forest, knew without looking that Jacob Reed had spotted her distinctive paint horse, her long braid flying behind her as they fled. The chase had begun, and with it, the final chapter in, a story that had started on a blood-soaked night beside a burning cabin. Whatever end awaited them in the wilderness ahead, Emma rode toward it not as victim, but as equal partner in her own destiny, flanked by the two men who represented everything she had lost and everything she might yet find. They rode hard through forests thick with pine and spruce, the horses' hooves thundering against the soft earth. Emma leaned low over her mare's neck, the animal responding to her subtle guidance with a trust born of months together. Behind them, shouts echoed through the trees as Reed's men gave chase, the gap between hunters and hunted narrowing with each passing minute. "We can't outrun them on open ground," Samuel called, his voice barely audible over the rush of wind and hoofbeats. "They've got fresher mounts." Maka, riding slightly ahead, gestured toward a rocky outcropping that rose to their right. "The I stones," he shouted back. "Many paths, difficult terrain for those who don't know the way." Emma nodded, understanding. The formation, a jumbled maze of massive boulders, narrow canyons, and treacherous scree slopes, would provide the advantage they needed. Maka had taken her hunting there during the early spring thaw, teaching her the hidden routes that wound through what appeared from a distance to be impassable terrain. They veered sharply, abandoning the relatively clear forest floor for a steep game trail that ascended toward the rocks. Their horses, mountain-bred and sure-footed, picked their way upward with caution but confidence. Behind them, the first of Reed's men burst from the trees, raising a shout of triumph at the sight of their quarry seemingly trapped against the rocky face. "They think they have us," Emma observed, a grim smile touching her lips. Samuel shot, her sideways glance, surprise and something like respect in his expression. This calculated coolness under pursuit was not a quality he would have associated with his schoolteacher sister of old. Maka led them into a narrow crevice, barely wide enough for the horses to pass single file, its entrance partially obscured by a stand of juniper. The passage twisted sharply, then opened into a labyrinthine series of interconnected small canyons and boulder fields. To the uninitiated eye, it appeared a chaotic jumble, offering no clear path forward. "This way," Maka directed, turning his horse toward what looked like a solid rock wall. Only as they approached did Emma discern the narrow gap, a passage that would force them to dismount and lead the horses through single file. "Will they follow?" Samuel asked, sliding from his saddle and eyeing the tight squeeze with concern. "Some will," Maka replied. "Others will try to circle around, thinking to cut us off on the other side." He gestured upward, where the rocks formed a natural fortress with multiple elevated vantage points. "Up there, we can see without being seen." They worked quickly, leading the reluctant horses through the narrow passage, emerging into a hidden grotto surrounded by towering stone walls. A small spring bubbled from the rock face, creating a shallow pool before disappearing underground again. Sparse vegetation, hardy juniper and sage, clung to cracks in the otherwise barren enclosure. "The horses stay here," Maka decided, quickly unsaddling his mount. "Less weight to climb, less noise to betray us." Emma followed suit, stripping her mare of tack and giving the animal a reassuring pat before turning to the gear they would carry. They packed only essentials: water, pemmican, weapons, minimal medical supplies. Everything else could be sacrificed to speed and stealth. "How do we get up there?" Samuel asked, eyeing the seemingly smooth stone walls. In answer, Maka moved to the far side of the grotto, where a series of natural ledges, nearly invisible unless one knew exactly where to look, formed a rudimentary staircase up the rock face. "Apache children learn this climb as soon as they can walk," he said, his voice holding a hint of challenge as he glanced at Samuel. Samuel's jaw tightened, but he nodded acceptance of the unstated competition. "After you." Emma suppressed a sigh at this display of male pride, slinging her pack over her shoulder and following Mahka up the stone steps before her brother could protest. The climb was demanding but familiar. She had done it several times during hunting trips, and she moved with practiced confidence despite the height. They reached the upper plateau just as the first of Reed's men entered the grotto below. From their elevated position, concealed behind boulders that rimmed the open space like teeth, they had perfect visibility while remaining hidden from those below. Fletcher led the group, 6 men in total, with Reed himself conspicuously absent. The tall outlaw surveyed the enclosed space with obvious frustration, noting the unsaddled horses and the apparent lack of exits. "They've gone up," he growled to his companions. "Find a way to follow." 2 men began searching the walls for the hidden path, while the others secured the horses. Emma studied Fletcher through a narrow gap between boulders, trying to read his strategy. Would he split his force, sending some men to continue the presumed circle around the high stones? Or would he commit fully to this pursuit, believing they had cornered their prey? "Reed's not with them," Samuel whispered, echoing her own observation. "He must be leading another group around." Mahka nodded agreement. "The scarred man is cunning. He will try to trap us between his forces." "Then we need to be elsewhere," Emma concluded. "Lead them on a long chase while we circle back toward the band." "Risky," Samuel objected. "What if Reed's group intercepts the Apache families instead?" Emma hadn't considered this possibility, and the thought sent cold fear through her veins. If Reed discovered the vulnerable band while hunting for her, he wouldn't hesitate to use them as leverage, or worse, indulge in the frontier prejudice that viewed all Apache as legitimate targets, regardless of age or gender. "We need to know where everyone is," she said finally. "Scout before we commit to any direction." Mahka nodded approval. "From the highest point, we can see much of the valley. Follow me and stay low." They crawled away from the rim using boulders and scrub vegetation for cover as they ascended toward the uppermost pinnacle of the high stones. The route demanded careful hand and foot placement, testing Emma's newly acquired climbing skills. Samuel struggled more, his larger frame less suited to the narrow crevices and precarious ledges, but he persevered with grim determination. Below, shouts indicated Fletcher's men had discovered the hidden staircase and were beginning their ascent. The pursuit would reach the upper plateau within minutes. "Here," Mahka directed, leading them into a natural chimney in the rock face, vertical shaft barely wider than a man's shoulders. "Climb, I will follow and cover our tracks." Emma went first, bracing her back against one wall and her feet against the other, working her way upward in a controlled shimmy that Nakia had taught her for harvesting eagle feathers from otherwise inaccessible nest sites. Samuel watched with undisguised amazement before attempting the technique himself, his progress slower but steady. Mahka came last, using a branch from a stunted pine to sweep away any obvious signs of their passage. From the rock below, the chimney ascended nearly 30 feet before opening onto a wind-scoured platform near the very peak of the formation. From this vantage point, they could see for miles in all directions. The forested valley they had fled, the distant mountains, still crowned with snow, and the winding game trails that connected various hunting grounds. "There," Emma pointed, having spotted movement along the northern route the Apache band would have taken. "That must be Reed's second group." A line of riders moved parallel to the most logical path for the fleeing families, clearly searching for signs of recent passage. Mahka studied the distant figures through narrowed eyes. Too far to be sure, but they appeared to be following the wrong trail. Tokala would have taken the people through the hidden valley, not along the open ridge. "Maybe," Samuel said doubtfully, "but Reed's got experienced trackers with him. If anyone left signs..." He didn't need to finish the thought. Even the most careful band might leave traces when traveling with children and elders. A broken branch, disturbed earth, remnants of a hasty meal. Any such sign would be like a beacon to men determined to find them. We need to draw them back toward us, Emma decided. All of them, not just Fletcher's group. Maka considered her words, then nodded slowly. A signal fire, large enough to be seen from the valley floor. Won't that bring Fletcher's men right to us? Samuel objected. Yes, Emma confirmed. That's the point. We want all of Reed's forces focused on us, not searching for the band. Understanding dawned in her brother's eyes, a deliberate diversion. There is dry wood there, Maka indicated a cluster of dead pines on a nearby slope, victims of lightning strike years earlier, and pitch pine for smoke. I'll help gather it, Samuel volunteered, surprising Emma with his immediate cooperation. First, we must lose those who follow too closely, Maka cautioned, gesturing toward the chimney they had just ascended. Already, sounds of pursuit echoed up the narrow shaft as Fletcher's men discovered their route. The chief pointed to an almost invisible trail that wound around the backside of the pinnacle. This leads to a drop, too far to jump, but safe with a rope. From his pack, he produced a coil of braided rawhide, quickly securing one end to a sturdy outcropping. The other end, he dropped over the edge of what proved to be a sheer 15-foot cliff, the rope dangling just above a narrow ledge that continued the path beyond. Ladies first, Samuel quipped, gesturing toward the rope with exaggerated courtesy. Emma rolled her eyes, but moved forward without hesitation, grasping the rawhide and lowering herself over the edge with the controlled descent Maka had taught her during winter hunts. Her feet found the ledge below, and she moved aside to make room for the others. Samuel followed with less grace, but equal effectiveness. Maka came last, pausing at the top to make a slight adjustment to the rope's anchor. "What are you doing?" Emma called up softly. "Ensuring they can follow," he replied, but not too quickly. He had rigged the anchor to hold firm initially, but failed under the weight of multiple climbers, an ingenious delay tactic that would slow their pursuers without causing serious injury. After descending himself, he gave the rope a sharp tug that set his trap, then led them quickly along the narrow trail toward the dead pines. They worked efficiently, gathering armloads of tinder-dry wood and pitch-laden pine knots, assembling them in a clearing where the resulting fire would be visible for miles. While they worked, shouts from the pinnacle confirmed Fletcher's men had reached the chimney exit. Discovering their quarry had once again slipped away. "We'll need to move fast once this is lit," Samuel observed, arranging larger logs in a pattern that would ensure a sustained burn. "Every man in these mountains will see it." "That's the idea," Emma reminded him, adding pine needles to the base of the structure where they would catch quickly and generate abundant smoke. Mika surveyed their work with critical eye, then nodded approval. "I will light it. You two start toward the eastern ravine. I will catch up." Emma hesitated. "We should stay together." "I'm fastest," the chief stated simply, "and I know which trails to take after." He met her concerned gaze directly. "Trust me, Emma." Something in his voice, a warmth beneath the practical tone, reassured her. "Be careful," she said softly, then turned to Samuel. "Let's go." They moved swiftly along the ridge, heading east as directed. Behind them, minutes later, a column of smoke began to rise from the clearing, thin at first, then billowing into a dark plume as the pitch pine caught and burned hot. Maka had built not just a signal fire, but a beacon impossible to ignore. "He's good," Samuel admitted grudgingly as they paused to catch their breath in the shelter of a massive boulder. "Never seen anyone move through rough country like that." Emma smiled slightly at this acknowledgement of Maka's skills from her previously skeptical brother. "The Apache have traversed these mountains for generations. Every path, every water source, every hiding place. It's all knowledge passed down through centuries." Samuel studied her with open curiosity. You really respect them, don't you? It's not just gratitude for saving you. How could I not? Emma replied. They took in a strange woman from a people who have done nothing but harm them. They shared food, shelter, knowledge. She touched the beaded necklace at her throat. They helped me find strength I never knew I possessed. Samuel's response was interrupted by Maka's arrival, the chief moving so silently through the underbrush that both siblings started at his sudden appearance. The fire does its work, he reported with grim satisfaction. Fletcher's men have descended to investigate. And see there. He pointed toward the valley floor, where distant riders could be seen converging on the high stones. The scarred man comes. Emma felt a chill despite the spring warmth. Jacob Reed, the architect of her family's destruction, the man who had ripped her from everything familiar and set her on this unexpected path, was closing in. Part of her wanted to flee as far and fast as possible. Another part, forged in the crucible of frontier survival, wanted to face him at last. "What's the plan?" Samuel asked, hand resting on his pistol as if anticipating imminent confrontation. "We keep moving," Maka decided. East, then north through Broken Fang Pass. The terrain grows too difficult for horses there, forcing them to continue on foot if they wish to follow. "And once they're on foot?" Emma prompted. A rare smile touched the chief's lips, fierce and somehow wolfish. "Then we hunt instead of being hunted." The strategy was sound. On horseback, Reed's superior numbers gave him advantage. On foot, in unfamiliar wilderness, that advantage evaporated against three people who knew the land intimately. Emma and Samuel nodded agreement, and they set off at a steady jog that ate distance while conserving energy for the challenges ahead. The eastern ravine proved to be a water-carved gash through layered sandstone, descending steeply through switchbacks and natural staircases toward a broader valley beyond. They moved quickly but carefully, mindful that a twisted ankle or worse could leave them vulnerable to the pursuit that would surely follow. Emma found herself in the middle position, with Maka leading and Samuel bringing up the rear. She noted with approval that her brother had adapted quickly to wilderness travel, moving with increasing quietness and awareness of his surroundings. The months of tracking her had honed skills their father had begun teaching him before tragedy struck. "Wait!" Maka signaled abruptly, dropping into a crouch behind a boulder. Emma and Samuel followed suit instantly, years of frontier instinct overriding any question. For long moments, they remained motionless, barely breathing. Then Emma heard what had alerted Maka. Voices carried on the breeze from somewhere ahead. "Circles back toward the pass." A man's voice floated to them, the words indistinct but the intention clear. "Cut them off before—" Another voice responded, followed by the distinctive sound of a rifle being checked and loaded. Maka signaled retreat with a slight gesture. They backtracked silently up the ravine, ducking into a side crevice to confer in whispers. "Another group," the chief confirmed, "positioned to intercept us on the eastern route." Samuel frowned. "How many men does Reed have? It's like he brought half the territory with him." "Fletcher could have recruited additional guns in copper." "Springs," Emma suggested. "Men who would jump at promised gold without asking too many questions about where it came from. Or why they're hunting a woman and an Apache chief," Samuel added bitterly. Maka considered their options, his expression giving nothing away. "We cannot go east now. North is still watched by the scarred man's riders. South returns us to Fletcher at the high stones." "West, then," Emma concluded. "Back toward Devil's Backbone Gorge." Maka's gaze sharpened at her suggestion. "Why there?" Emma touched the locket containing her father's map. "The gold Reed seeks is near there, according to this. He won't expect us to head directly toward it. Or he'll expect exactly that," Samuel countered, "and be waiting for us." "Perhaps," Emma acknowledged. but the gorge offers many hiding places, caves we could defend if necessary, and if Reed is so determined to find this gold. Mahka nodded slowly, understanding her unspoken strategy. We could lead him to it, end his pursuit by giving him what he wants. Gold has a way of making men careless, Samuel added, warming to the idea. Distracted. The decision made, they altered course, working their way back up the ravine before cutting west along a ridge that would eventually lead toward the gorge. The route was more exposed than Mahka would have preferred, but speed now took precedence over perfect concealment. They needed distance between themselves and the converging forces behind them. The sun climbed toward its zenith as they pushed onward, the spring heat drawing sweat despite the elevated terrain. Emma fell into the rhythm of steady movement, her body accustomed now to covering difficult ground efficiently. They paused only briefly at a small seep spring to refill water skins before continuing their westward trek. By mid-afternoon, the distinctive silhouette of Devil's Backbone Gorge appeared on the horizon, a jagged tear in the earth where ancient forces had split the mountain like an axe through wood. The sight brought conflicting emotions for Emma, memories of her first terrified journey through its confines as Reed's captive intermingling with the recollection of Mahka's unexpected appearance. Her first glimpse of the man who would reshape her understanding of the frontier, of herself. We should reach the eastern entrance by nightfall, Mahka estimated, studying the distant landmark, but we will be vulnerable during the approach. No cover for the last mile. Samuel scanned the surrounding terrain with a tracker's eye. Any sign they've flanked us? Not yet, the chief replied, but the scarred man is persistent. He will have sent riders in all directions once he saw the signal fire. Emma considered the fading daylight, measuring risk against necessity. We need shelter for the night, somewhere defensible. Mahka nodded agreement. There is a cave system in the northern wall of the gorge. Difficult to find unless you know what to seek. We can reach it after dark. And tomorrow? Samuel pressed. What's the plan once we're in the gorge? Emma exchanged glances with Mahka, a silent communication born of months solving survival challenges together. Tomorrow. We find the gold, she said simply, and use it to end this chase once and for all. They continued westward as afternoon surrendered to evening, the landscape painted in lengthening shadows and deepening hues. The openness of the terrain kept them alert, scanning continuously for any sign of pursuit. Thus far, their strategy appeared successful. Reed's forces remained focused on the high stones and eastern routes, allowing them this window of opportunity to double back toward the gorge. As dusk approached, they descended from the ridge they had been following, entering a shallow valley that would lead directly to the gorge entrance. Here, Mahka set a more cautious pace, moving from cover to cover where possible, all senses attuned to potential danger. Something's wrong, he said suddenly, freezing in place. Listen. Emma and Samuel halted beside him, straining to identify whatever had triggered his concern. The valley lay silent in the gathering darkness, too silent. No birds called, no small creatures rustled in the underbrush. Ambush, Samuel breathed, his hand moving to his pistol. Before they could retreat, the stillness shattered. Riders materialized from a dry wash to their left, while more appeared on the ridge they had just descended. The trap, sprung with military precision, left no obvious avenue of escape. Run, Mahka commanded, shoving Emma toward a stand of junipers that offered their only potential cover. I will hold them. No! Emma protested, even as Samuel grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the trees. Mahka already had his bow drawn, an arrow flying true to unseat the nearest rider. The man fell with a cry, creating momentary confusion among the others, confusion the chief instantly exploited, charging directly at the approaching line with a war cry that echoed through the valley. The audacity of a single Apache attacking. Multiple armed men created exactly the distraction intended. Gunfire erupted, but the rider's aim suffered from surprise and the failing light. Maka ducked and wove between their horses, his knife flashing as he slashed at saddle girths and hamstrings, creating chaos in their ranks. Emma resisted her brother's efforts to pull her to safety. "We can't leave him. He's giving us a chance," Samuel insisted. "Don't waste it." A familiar voice cut through the commotion. Jacob Reed, instantly recognizable even after months. "The girl! Get the girl!" Several riders broke away from the main group, charging toward the junipers where Emma and Samuel stood exposed. Decision. Time evaporated. Samuel pushed Emma behind him and opened fire with his pistol, dropping the lead rider with a clean shot to the chest. Emma drew the knife from her belt, not a frontier weapon, but an Apache blade given to her by Nakia, balanced for throwing. She had practiced countless hours during the winter months, determined to master this skill that might mean survival in the wilderness. Now, as a rider bore down on them from the flank, she took careful aim and released. The blade caught the man in the shoulder, not a killing blow, but enough to unbalance him from his saddle. He tumbled to the ground with a curse as his horse galloped past. "Move!" Samuel urged, grabbing her hand and pulling her toward the deeper shadows beneath. The trees. They ran hard, weaving between gnarled trunks as bullets splintered bark around them. A quick glance back showed Maka still fighting, a whirlwind of controlled violence that had scattered the original ambush into disarray. Reed himself had joined the fray, recognizable by his distinctive hat and the flash of his scarred face in the last light of day. "We have to help him," Emma insisted, pulling against Samuel's grip. Her brother hesitated, torn between the instinct to protect his sister and the growing respect he felt for the Apache chief who fought so valiantly to give them time to escape. Before he could decide, a sharp crack echoed through the valley. A rifle shot, distinct from the chaotic pistol fire of the melee. Maka staggered, clutching his side. Blood bloomed dark against his buckskins. "No!" Emma's cry tore from her throat before Samuel could stop her. She broke from his grasp, running not away from danger, but directly toward it. The unexpected movement froze the scene momentarily, Reed's men pausing in confusion at the sight of their quarry charging toward them rather than fleeing. Samuel had no choice but to follow, his pistol barking as he provided covering fire for his sister's reckless advance. Maka struggled to regain his footing, one hand pressed to his wound, knife still gripped in the other. His eyes widened at the sight of Emma running toward him, her face set in fierce determination, unlike anything he had seen even during their most desperate winter hunts. Reed recovered first, shouting orders to his scattered men. "Take her alive! Kill the others!" Emma reached Maka just as the riders began to regroup, her arms sliding around his waist to support him. "Lean on me," she commanded, her voice steady despite the terror coursing through her veins. "You should have run," the chief admonished, even as he accepted her assistance. "Not without you," she replied simply. Samuel reached them seconds later, quickly assessing Maka's injury. "Can you move?" The chief nodded grimly. "For now." Together, they retreated toward the junipers, Samuel providing rear guard with his dwindling ammunition. The brief respite Maka's attack had provided was ending as Reed organized his forces for a coordinated pursuit. "The caves," Maka directed through gritted teeth. "Our only chance now." They altered course, abandoning the apparent safety of the trees for a direct line toward the now invisible gorge entrance. Darkness had fallen completely, a blessing that hid their movements but also made navigation treacherous. Emma kept her arm around Maka, feeling the warmth of his blood seeping through her buckskins, hearing the controlled rhythm of his breathing as he fought against pain and weakness. Behind them, riders regrouped, lanterns flaring to life as Reed prepared for a methodical sweep of the area. They would be visible the moment they left the tree line, with open ground to cross before reaching the gorge. "We'll never make it," Samuel murmured, counting his remaining bullets with a quick check. "Not all three of us." Emma understood instantly what her brother was suggesting. "No, we stay together." Maka straightened beside her, his breathing steadier now that he had regained some control. "Your brother speaks wisdom, Emma. I will draw them away. You two continue to the caves." "Absolutely not," Emma replied with such fierce conviction that both men stared at her in surprise. "I have not survived captivity, Winter, and pursuit only to abandon either of you now." She glanced toward the approaching lanterns. "We need a different strategy, something unexpected." Samuel's expression shifted as an idea formed. "The map," he said suddenly. "Reed wants it more than anything. Maybe we can use that." Emma touched the locket at her throat, her father's final legacy hidden within. "How?" "A diversion," Samuel explained quickly. "I take the map, make sure they see me with it, lead them away from the gorge. You get Maka to the caves. Once he's safe, you can circle back to help me if needed." The plan had merit. Simple, direct, playing to Reed's obsession while giving the injured Maka his best chance at survival. Yet Emma balked at the thought of separating, of Samuel facing Reed's wrath alone. "It is a warrior's plan," Maka said quietly, respect evident in his tone despite his weakened state. "Brave and honorable." Emma looked between them. These two men from vastly different worlds who had somehow found common ground in their desire to protect her, and whom she now felt equally compelled to protect in return. The fierce independence she had developed over months of frontier survival warred with the pragmatic recognition that Maka needed immediate attention for his wound. 2 hours, she said finally, removing the locket and pressing it into Samuel's. "And if you're not at the caves by then, I'm coming to find you." Samuel's fingers closed around the silver oval, warm from its constant contact with Emma's skin. "I'll be there," he promised, though all three knew such assurances carried little weight in the brutal reality of frontier conflict. "You'll need a head start," Emma observed, nodding toward the approaching lights, "something to draw their immediate attention." Maka reached weakly for his powder horn. "Fire," he suggested. "The junipers will burn hot and fast." Samuel nodded, quickly gathering dry needles and twigs at the base of the nearest tree. A strike of flint against steel, a careful nursing of the spark into flame, and soon fire licked upward through the resinous branches. The dry tree caught with explosive eagerness, creating an instant beacon visible for miles. "That ought to hold their attention," Samuel said with grim satisfaction, pocketing Emma's locket. "Get him to safety. I'll lead them on a merry chase before doubling back to the caves." Emma embraced her brother fiercely. "Be careful." "You too, Em." He turned to Maka, offering his hand in the white man's gesture of respect. After a moment's hesitation, the chief clasped it firmly despite his weakened state. No further words were necessary. Samuel melted into the darkness toward the east, deliberately leaving clear tracks for Reed's men to follow. Meanwhile, Emma adjusted her grip on Maka, supporting as much of his weight as he would allow as they moved westward toward the gorge entrance. Behind them, shouts confirmed Reed's men had spotted the fire. Hoofbeats pounded toward the burning juniper lantern, light converging on the beacon Samuel had created. For the moment at least, his diversion was working perfectly. "He is brave, your brother," Maka observed as they made slow progress across the open ground. "A worthy son of your father." "He is," Emma agreed, touched by this acknowledgement. "Just as you are a worthy leader of your people." They continued in silence after that, conserving strength for the difficult journey ahead. The gorge entrance loomed before them as a deeper darkness against the night sky, a jagged mouth ready to swallow them into its depths. Emma felt a momentary hesitation as they crossed that threshold. returning to the place where her unexpected journey had begun, where captivity had given way to rescue, where one life had ended and another begun. Maka seemed to sense her thoughts. "The circle closes," he murmured, "but does not end." Emma tightened her grip around his waist in wordless agreement. Whatever awaited them in the shadows of Devil's Backbone Gorge, reunion or separation, victory or defeat, they would face it as they had faced the winter, together, drawing strength from unexpected bonds that had proven more durable than any frontier hardship could break. The darkness of Devil's Backbone Gorge enveloped them like a protective cloak. Emma guided Maka along the narrow path that wound between towering walls of ancient stone, her senses heightened by urgency and fear. His breathing had grown more labored, each step more difficult than the last, but he refused to stop. "Not much farther," she whispered, though in truth she was uncertain. She had only Maka's earlier directions to guide her, a cave system in the northern wall, difficult to find unless you knew what to seek. "There," Maka murmured, gesturing weakly toward what appeared to be nothing more than a shadow among shadows. Behind the fallen rocks, Emma narrowed her eyes, focusing on the spot he indicated. Slowly, the outline of an opening took shape, a natural archway half concealed by debris from some long-ago rockfall. She adjusted their course, supporting more of Maka's weight as his strength continued to ebb. The cave entrance was narrow but navigable. Inside, the space opened surprisingly, the air cool and dry with the distinctive scent of mineral-rich earth. Emma helped Maka to a relatively flat stone surface before fumbling in her pack for the small tin of strike-anywhere matches she carried. One of the few concessions to white technology she had maintained during her time with the Apache. A tiny flame blossomed in the darkness, illuminating their sanctuary in flickering gold. The cave extended deeper than she had expected, its walls smooth in some places, jagged in others, with smaller chambers branching off from the main cavern. Natural shelves of stone held ancient pottery shards and other evidence of previous human habitation, perhaps Apache, perhaps peoples even older, whose names had been lost to time. "Your wound," Emma said, returning her attention to Maka. "I need to see it." Gently, she helped him remove the buckskin shirt, wincing at the dark stain spreading across his side. The bullet had torn through flesh just below his ribs, leaving an ugly furrow that bled steadily but didn't appear to have damaged vital organs. Still, blood loss and infection posed immediate threats in the wilderness. Emma worked methodically, drawing on months of observing Nakia's healing practices. She cleansed the wound with water from her skin, then applied a poultice of herbs from the medicine pouch the old woman had given her before their parting. Maka remained stoic throughout, his only reaction an occasional tightening around his eyes when pain broke through his formidable control. "You have learned well," he observed as she bound his torso with strips torn from her own undershirt. "I had good teachers," Emma replied, securing the makeshift bandage with a final knot. Maka caught her hand as she withdrew, his fingers closing gently around hers. "I do not speak only of medicine." Their eyes met in the wavering matchlight, a moment of connection that transcended their circumstances. Emma felt the now familiar warmth spreading through her chest. Not the desperate attraction of dime novel romances, but something deeper, more profound. Recognition of a kindred spirit across the vast gulf of their different worlds. "Rest now," she said softly, reluctantly breaking the contact. "I need to watch for Samuel." Maka nodded, understanding her concern for her brother. "Wake me if there is danger." Emma arranged her pack beneath his head for comfort, then moved to the cave entrance. Outside, the gorge lay silent under a blanket of stars, the rugged landscape transformed into a realm of silver and shadow by the waxing moon. She settled into a vigilant crouch just inside the opening, ears straining for any sound of pursuit. or of Samuel's return. Time passed with excruciating slowness. Emma marked its passage by the steady movement of stars across the narrow slice of sky visible between the gorge walls. An hour crept by, then another. No sign of Samuel, no sign of Reed's men. The silence grew oppressive, laden with too many possibilities. Inside the cave, Maka slept fitfully, occasional murmurs in Apache suggesting dreams or delirium. Emma checked his wound periodically, relieved to find the bleeding had slowed to a seep. His skin felt warm, but not dangerously hot. No fever. Yet though infection remained a constant threat, as the second hour neared its end, Emma faced the promise she had made to her brother. If Samuel didn't return by this time, she would go searching for him. A dangerous proposition, with Reed's men still in pursuit, but one her conscience would not allow her to abandon. She was preparing to leave, checking her knife and gathering supplies for the search, when a faint sound echoed through the gorge, the scuff of boot on stone, the dislodging of a pebble. Emma froze, pressing deeper into the shadow of the cave entrance, her hand instinctively seeking the knife at her belt. A figure emerged from the darkness, moving with the careful stealth of a hunter. For one hopeful moment, Emma thought it might be Samuel. Then, moonlight caught the newcomer's face, revealing a familiar scarred visage that haunted her nightmares. Jacob Reed had found them. He moved alone, which struck Emma as odd, given his usual preference for overwhelming numbers. His rifle was slung across his back, a pistol held ready in his right hand as he scanned the gorge walls. He was searching, methodically, examining each shadow and crevice with the patience of a predator who knows his prey is cornered. Emma retreated deeper into the cave, heart pounding. She had to warn Maka, had to prepare for the confrontation that now seemed inevitable. Had Reed somehow captured Samuel? Was this why he hunted alone, confident his men held leverage elsewhere? She had nearly reached Maka's side when a second sound froze her in place, the unmistakable metallic click of a pistol being cocked directly behind her. "Hello, Emma?" Fletcher's voice came softly from the darkness of the cave's interior. It'd been a long time. Emma turned slowly, mind racing. The tall outlaw must have found another entrance to the cave system, approaching from deeper within, while Reed searched from the front. They were trapped between the two men, with Maka injured and no sign of Samuel. "Where's my brother?" she demanded, keeping her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. Fletcher's teeth gleamed in the dim light, a humorless smile. Keeping the boys entertained back at camp, put up quite a fight before they took him down. He gestured with his pistol. "The chief still breathing?" Emma didn't answer, unwilling to confirm Maka's vulnerability. Instead, she shifted slightly, keeping herself between Fletcher and the injured Apache. "Reed wants the map," Fletcher continued, unperturbed by her silence. "Give it up and maybe your brother lives. Simple trade." "Samuel has the map," Emma replied truthfully. "You've wasted your time coming here." Fletcher's expression darkened. "Don't play games, girl. Reed knows you wouldn't let that locket out of your sight." He took a step closer, pistol unwavering. "Hand it over nice and easy, and we can all walk away from this." The lie was transparent. Reed had never intended to let any of them walk away once he had what he wanted. The map was their only leverage, and Samuel had taken it deliberately to create this exact confusion. A shadow moved at the cave entrance, Reed himself silhouetted against the night sky as he ducked inside. His scarred face twisted into a triumphant smile as he spotted Emma. "Well, well," he drawled. "The prodigal captive returns. Been quite the chase, Miss Wilson." Emma faced him squarely, chin lifted in defiance. "Not much of a captive if I keep escaping, am I?" Reed's smile didn't waver, but something dangerous flashed in his eyes. "Always did like your spirit, going to enjoy breaking it." His gaze shifted to Fletcher, the savage. "Over there," Fletcher indicated with a nod. "Looks half dead already." Reed approached slowly, savoring his apparent victory. "And the map?" "She claims her brother has it," Fletcher reported. "Is that so?" Reed stopped a few paces from Emma, studying her with cold calculation. "Funny thing about that, your brother swore you had it before my boys knocked him senseless. He pulled something from his pocket, a scrap of paper, blood-stained and crumpled. All we found on him was this, worthless." Emma's heart sank. The paper in Reed's hand was clearly not her father's map, some decoy Samuel had prepared. The real map remained hidden in her mother's locket, which now hung beneath her buckskin dress, its outline invisible against the fabric. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, playing for time. "Father never gave me any map." Reed's patience visibly thinned. "Enough games. Fletcher, search her. I'll watch our Apache friend in case he's feeling heroic." Fletcher holstered his pistol and stepped forward, reaching for Emma with undisguised anticipation. She steeled herself, knowing resistance would be futile against his superior strength. As his hands began their invasive search, Emma silently apologized to her father for failing to protect his final legacy. "Stop!" The voice came from the cave entrance, not Reed or Fletcher, but Samuel. He stood framed against the night sky, blood streaking one side of his face, but his stance steady, his rifle trained on Reed's back. "Let her go," he commanded, his voice carrying the same quiet authority their fathers had once held. Reed turned slowly, his expression caught between surprise and contempt. "Well now, the whole family's reunited. How touching." He made no move to lower his own weapon, which remained pointed toward Marka's prone form. "One bullet for the savage, one for you. Your sister couldn't outrun both. Want to reconsider your position?" Samuel's rifle didn't waver. "You won't find the gold without us. Father made sure of that." A tense silence filled the cave, broken only by the shallow sound of Marka's breathing and the distant cry of a hunting owl outside. Reed's eyes narrowed as he calculated odds and outcomes. "The map's incomplete," Samuel continued, pressing his advantage. "Just enough information to get you close, not enough to find the exact location. Father split the directions between us." It was a brilliant lie, Emma realized, playing to Reed's greed while creating uncertainty. The outlaw couldn't risk killing them if they truly held divided pieces of the secret. Reed's expression shifted as he considered this new information. "Prove it," he demanded finally. Samuel lowered his rifle slightly, a calculated risk. "Emma has the map with landmarks. I memorized Father's notes on how to interpret them. Kill either of us. You'll never find what you're looking for." Fletcher looked to Reed for direction, his grip on Emma loosening slightly in his confusion. She seized the opportunity, driving, her elbow backward into his sternum with all the strength Marka had taught her to generate. The outlaw doubled over with a wheeze, and Emma twisted free, snatching the knife from her belt in one fluid motion. Reed reacted instantly, swinging his pistol toward her. The shot never came. In a blur of movement that defied his injured state, Marka launched himself from his resting place, crossing the space between them with the silent grace of a hunting cougar. His body collided with Reed's just as the outlaw's finger tightened on the trigger, sending the shot wild to shatter ancient pottery on a nearby shelf. The two men went down in a tangle of limbs, Marka's superior conditioning momentarily offsetting Reed's uninjured state. They grappled for control of the pistol, rolling dangerously close to the fire Emma had built. Samuel advanced, training his rifle on Fletcher, who was still struggling to regain his breath. "Don't move," he warned, the steel in his voice leaving no doubt about his willingness to fire. Emma turned her attention to the more desperate struggle between Marka and Reed. The Apache chief's strength was failing, his wound reopened by the exertion, fresh blood darkening his bandages. Reed sensed the advantage turning his way, a feral, grin spreading across his scarred features as he forced the pistol's barrel incrementally toward Maka's chest. Without conscious thought, Emma acted. The knife in her hand, Nakia's gift balanced for throwing, left her fingers in a smooth arc, just as the old woman had taught her. It struck Reed's shoulder with enough force to embed itself to the hilt. The outlaw howled, his grip on the pistol faltering. Maka seized the moment, wrenching the weapon free and reversing their positions in one final surge of desperate strength. The barrel pressed against Reed's throat, stopping his struggles instantly. "It would be justice to end you," Maka said. Quietly, his English precise despite his labored breathing, "for all you have done to Emma's family, to mine." Reed's eyes widened, genuine fear replacing arrogance as he recognized the depth of the chief's controlled rage. "The gold," he gasped, "worth more than revenge. We can split it." Silence. Maka's command cut through Reed's desperate bargaining. "You understand nothing of worth." He glanced toward Emma, a silent question in his gaze. She moved forward, kneeling beside them. This man had murdered her father, burned her home, dragged her into a nightmare that had forever altered her life's course. By any frontier standard, his life was forfeit. Blood demanded blood in the harsh justice of the territories. Yet killing him would not restore what was lost, would not bring her father back, would not erase the scars, visible and invisible, that months of hardship had etched into her soul. More importantly, it would not honor the woman she had become, a woman who had learned from the Apache that strength lay not just in taking life when necessary, but in choosing when to preserve it. "Bind him," she said finally, "him and Fletcher both. When we reach Copper Springs, they'll stand trial for murder and kidnapping." Samuel looked surprised but didn't object. Frontier justice often bypassed formal procedures, but Emma's choice aligned with the law their father had respected despite its distant reach. Maka nodded once, accepting her decision without question. With Samuel's help, they secured the outlaws using strips of buckskin and sinew from their packs. Reed's wound, while painful, was not life-threatening, a mercy Emma had not consciously intended but did not regret. As dawn approached, casting the cave in gradual shades of gray and amber, the three sat in weary silence near the entrance, their prisoners secured deeper within. Maka's condition had stabilized after Emma redressed his wound, though he would need proper medical attention soon. Samuel had regained most of his strength after explaining how he had escaped Reed's men by creating a rock slide that separated him from his pursuers. "What happens now?" Samuel asked, voicing the question that hung between them. "The map, the gold." Emma removed her mother's locket, opening it to extract the precious document they had fought so hard to protect. "Father found this for us," she said softly, "to give us a future after Mother died, I think." She hesitated, looking between her brother and Maka. "I think he would want us to build something worthwhile with it." Maka studied her thoughtfully. "Gold causes much suffering between our peoples, brings greed, conflict, or opportunity," Emma suggested. "Land where both Apache and settlers could live in peace. A trading post, perhaps, where fair exchange replaces theft and violence." The idea took root as she spoke it aloud. Not a return to what was, but a bridge toward what might be. A place where the diverse strands of her life could weave together, rather than pulling her apart. Samuel considered the proposal with surprising openness. Father would have appreciated the irony, his gold funding cooperation instead of conflict. As the first rays of sunlight spilled into the gorge, illuminating the three figures at the cave entrance, Emma felt a sense of rightness settle over her. Not the neat resolution of dime novel adventures, but the complex piece of a path discovered rather than merely followed. Maka's hand found hers in the growing light, his touch carrying promises that needed no words. Beside them, Samuel watched with the beginning of understanding in his eyes, his own journey of transformation still unfolding but irreversibly begun. The frontier had taken much from Emma Wilson. Her home, her father, her former certainties about the world, and her place in it. But in their place, it had given her strength she had never imagined possessing. Connections that defied the harsh divisions of her time, and perhaps most precious of all, the freedom to forge an identity beyond the boundaries others would have imposed upon her. As they prepared to leave Devil's Backbone Gorge behind, Emma knew the road ahead would not be easy. Prejudice would not yield readily to their vision. The wounds of the past would not heal without scars. But with Maka beside, her and Samuel beginning to understand, she faced that uncertain future not with fear, but with quiet determination. The Apache chief who had rescued her had indeed stolen her heart, not as a prize to be claimed, but as a gift freely given between equals, who had found in each other's differences not division, but completion. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.